gunman ended up taking his own life. So we're now several hours, about three and a half hours into this, and what should be happening on scene right now? If we went by textbook, Brad, of, okay, we're this far into it, is the evidence response team beginning to move in? What is happening when you're 3.5 hours into it?
Oh, all right. So at this point, obviously, all of the victims, deceased or not deceased, have been moved. They're hopefully in hospitals, or on their way to the medical examiner's office or whatever it might be. So then what you have to do is make sure you don't contaminate the scene. One of the big problems in rural settings or remote settings where they don't have a lot of crime, they don't know sort of the particulars of basically keeping a scene like this as is. So that's going to be an issue of, did they seal it off? Did they not let 15 people who should have been in the scene in there, who may have contaminated the scene? My guess is not critically, but still, you don't want extra footprints and blood. You don't want other DNA. You don't want fingerprints. You don't want hairs and fibers which fall off of all of us as we walk through areas or touch things. So it's going to be that. So you've got you've got sort of the following going on. You're going to have a crowd. I'm going to guess probably ATF and FBI evidence response people are probably doing a big chunk of that scene, along with the local, if the sheriff even has crime scene folks, working the scene. And probably the Texas Department of Public Safety is in the middle of that also, I would think. And then you're going to have the whole intelligence side of this, where who is this guy? What set him off? Who's he connected to? What was the motive of the shooting? And I think probably at this point, secondarily, do we have to worry about somebody else getting shot? And so, that's sort of the 30,000 up in the air look down as to what I think is probably going on as we speak.
Brad Garrett. Brad, thank you. I want to go to another ABC News analyst and get his take on this as well. Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI. And Steve, we've been hearing from Brad over the last couple of hours, kind of looking at the potential that, at least on the surface, and we just don't know right now, that this could have been something other than terrorism, much more personal in a smaller community. What's your take as you hear all of this beginning to unfold?
Exactly. You take a look at this kind of situation here. Yeah, we're talking about a church. We're talking about a fairly rural area, the way it's described, outside of San Antonio. And that doesn't necessarily fit the typical description of international terrorism, because international terrorism is looking for significance. They're looking for mass casualties. This is mass casualties, but they're looking for usually urban areas. So this could be something that is either one, domestic terrorism, which falls into another number of categories, anarchists, anti-government activists, and so on. Or it could definitely be somebody that has a grudge. Maybe there was an incident at this church that the person had a friction, and this is the way they're acting out. So it sounds like it's very early in the investigation, but it definitely appears it doesn't fit the motive or the pattern where we see the international terrorism attacks.
The population in Sutherland Springs, only 643 people, as we begin to understand more about this community. And, Steve, I'll come back to you in just a moment. I want to go back to Pilar Arias with KTSA, who has been making her way to a briefing that we understand is going to happen. And, Pilar, give us the latest there on scene, what you're seeing.
Alex, I'm here at the City of Stockdale City Hall, where they're going to hold this press conference. And as I was saying when I cut off, because I lost service on the drive here, I really believe the people of Sutherland Springs asked that this location, that we be diverted away from the scene, away from the community center, because they want their time to grieve. They were actually briefed by the Texas DPS spokesman prior to them coming out and asking us to move location. So I really believe that's what happened here. But I did drive past the scene again on the way here, and traffic is still a mess right there. There's about a quarter mile surrounding the church that still has extensive crime scene tape. There are a lot of people standing in front of the church. I don't know if they were witnesses either inside or outside, but they're definitely there with law enforcement. So as soon as we learn the latest, we'll get it out, because this is going to be our first official press briefing. Of course, in these types of situations, there's a lot of hearsay as to what has happened or is happening. So now we're going to get it confirmed.
In a town of 643 people, I have to assume that those who were gathering probably knew people inside, and even if they weren't directly related to them, that they thought that that their friends were inside there. There's got to be a lot of emotion for those who were gathering in that area.
Absolutely. There's a lot of tears, a lot of hugs, and everyone is clenching onto their cell phones. I actually heard a woman before I left the community center calling somebody, and she said, please pick up your phone. I need to know you're okay. Where are you? And obviously she was leaving somebody a voicemail. So it's still very, very fresh, very active. And once we learn the latest, we'll let everybody know.
And as we're getting a lot of this coming in and we wait for this briefing, we understand that we were talking a few moments ago, Pilar, about the 14-year-old girl who died in this shooting. We understand that's the daughter of the pastor of the church. Frank Pomeroy is confirming the death of his daughter in the shooting. And he says that his 14-year-old daughter, Annabelle, is among the dead. His youngest daughter shot dead in his own church. He was in Oklahoma at the time of the shooting. He wasn't there. He says he's driving back now. He said every one of their close friends is among the deceased, according to the pastor there. He says he wants the world to know his daughter was one very beautiful, special child. And it really goes to show, Pilar, that this is a small community. They came to church on a Sunday. Most people likely knew the other people in there, and that this is going to rock this community in the sense that so many are affected.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we'll wait for updates from you as we wait now for this briefing to begin. We don't know when it's going to happen. We have been waiting for an update from law enforcement for the last couple of hours as this has been unfolding. The latest numbers that we've got right now, law enforcement official telling ABC News there are 27 victims who were dead, along with the shooter in unincorporated Wilson County in Sutherland Springs, population 643. At least 30 people have been injured in this as they begin to investigate. ABC's Brad Garrett joining me again, formerly of the FBI. And I understand Steve Gomez is with us. Brad is making some phone calls right now. So, Steve, now that we know the size of this town, 643 people, the investigation getting underway, that if this was somebody who was a local, it seems like they would have some answers pretty quickly.
Yes, I believe so. If there was, if it involved somebody that was locally connected to these people, and that should be able to be figured out relatively quickly because of the fact that whoever survived and is able to provide a witness account would be able to say that they recognize this person, or maybe this was said, and they are able to tie it to somebody that's local. So that's going to be, part of the investigation to try to figure out what was the person's motive. I mean, the person is dead. They're not going to be able to talk to the person, but they're going to be able to figure out who he is, where he's from. Was he from the local area? Was he just traveling? Is this just a random situation? The likelihood is that there is some sort of connection between the suspect and the church, or the people at the church, the congregation, maybe even the pastor or whoever the leader is, and that's something they're going to figure out in the investigation.
Investigation-wise, how is this different when you're talking a small community in a rural area versus Las Vegas or New York City in recent weeks with the attacks that have gone on there? That will the FBI likely play a much bigger role? Will the Texas Department of Public Safety take on a bigger role as well when you don't have a local agency that has that much of, at least we assume, that much of a investigative power to carry out a large-scale investigation?
Absolutely. So the FBI is designed where there are 56 field offices all over the country. There are what they call resident agency offices that are sprinkled throughout each of those field offices. And those RAs, as we call them, are designed to be in rural areas that cover those areas and have a lot of liaison and interaction with the smaller departments, such as the one that we're probably seeing here with the Sutherland Springs, to ensure that even though they may not have the massive amount of resources or expertise or capabilities, but the FBI is always working in partnership with them to bring them that type of expertise when needed. So that's what's happening here. A lot of times there's training, there's tabletop exercises that are done for these types of scenarios, and then that's pretty much been done all over the country because there have been so many active shooters, so many terrorist attacks, that the FBI and local law enforcement have recognized that they need to have that kind of partnership and that kind of joint training exercises going on for this situation. So hopefully they have prepared for this, and now the feds and the local and the state, agencies are able to come in and provide help to the sheriff there.
Steve, what immediately goes into effect to try to figure out if it's terrorism or not? And I have to assume in today's world of law enforcement that is an initial question and that they have to make sure there's not another threat out there. What road do they go down to figure out immediately, was this terrorism, was this something else?
So the first thing that they're doing is they have a dead body. The police were able to neutralize the suspect. The first thing they're doing is talking to the witnesses that can provide statements to ask them what was said. How did this go down? I mean, describe the sequence of events as fast as they can, recognizing some of them may need medical help, but they want to try to get as much detail about what happened leading up to and during the shooting, because they recognize that it's so important. Time is of the essence. If there is another shooter, another suspect, a co-conspirator, or whatever this person said that may indicate that this was bigger than just, say, one person committing this shooting. So they're going to be asking those questions, and they're immediately going to be diving into or trying to figure out who that person is and what their background is and so on to further that part of the investigation to figure out, is it just a lone wolf or is there something more to this? And that's why time is of the essence, because if there is another person or other reasons why this was done, they need to move as quickly as possible.
Well, and we did hear it, and we've talked a bit about it, but earlier today they thought that there was potentially another gunman out there, but that's not uncommon in these situations for the initial reports to come in of multiple shooters, and it turns out to be one or two, but not the multiple that the reports came out. So law enforcement has to deal with that, responding, that there's always that potential of these false reports of this being bigger than it was, at least suspect-wise.
Exactly, and that is the approach that law enforcement has with almost any one of these types of active shooter mass casualty attacks. You have to assume that there is more until proven otherwise. Same thing when it comes to terrorism. You take the posture of possible terrorism situation unless proven otherwise. So it probably doesn't look, at least from an international terrorism standpoint, that that's what they're dealing with. They're probably dealing with something different. But they still have to approach it from the standpoint of, okay, one shooter down, were there others? They have to at least consider that to ensure that nobody gets away, that nobody else is under a threat or the potential of another attack somewhere, until they can prove that that is not the case. So not only in Sutherland Springs, but throughout that whole Texas region, they're probably on high alert. Law enforcement is aware that this is going on. It's a Sunday, but still, there's messaging going on to all law enforcement agencies throughout Texas, probably New Mexico, nearby states, in the event that there is somebody else that was involved and decided to escape. They want to make sure everybody's on alert in the event that is the case, that there's another person or other suspects.
All of this happening in small-town Americana. Steve, thanks. I'll come back to you in a moment. I want to go to Bill O'Neill with KTSA in San Antonio joining us again. And, Bill, what do you have?
Pretty much the same as we've been hearing here for a little while now. At least 27 people dead is what the reports are saying. About as many hurt in this church in Sutherland Springs, the First Baptist Church, where those shots rang out a little after 11 o'clock this morning. We know the FBI, Texas Department of Public Safety, Wilson County Sheriff's Office, all trying to get to the bottom of exactly what happened there. We also know that the shooter is dead. How he died at this point, still a little bit of a question, whether it was his own hand or somebody else took him out. But situation, at least through all this heartbreak, is contained right now, Alex.
Bill, talk about where the shooter was either taken out or died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Was it away from the church? There's been some confusion about that almost like it was a traffic stop, or that for whatever reason he or she decided that was the place to kill themselves, but this was not at the church where it happened?
That's actually right. It did not actually, at least where he ended up, was not at the church. The shots, of course, rang out at the church. There's some conflicting statements of whether or not somebody at the church may have opened fire and hit him, and then this person got in their vehicle and took off. But they were a good couple of miles or so away from the church, headed out of town, if you will, out of Sutherland Springs, where their vehicle had come to a stop, and that person is deceased inside of that vehicle. Last check, we understand that vehicle is still there with the person there as well.
And life in Texas, it would not be uncommon for people in that church to have been armed, right?
No, absolutely. That is absolutely true, especially small town Texas. There is a possibility that those folks would be inside of that church, would be carrying weapons, and it is at least a possibility. We don't know this for sure, but it is certainly a possibility, given the geography of where this happened, that somebody may have answered back in kind, if you will. Absolutely possible.
The area around there, have there been any warnings that have gone out from law enforcement to be heightened awareness in San Antonio? Anything going on in that general area, or does it seem that they truly believe this threat is over?
No, this threat is as far as this threat goes, they are the message that we've been getting for a good while now is the threat is over. The situation is contained. There is no further threat against the community there. Certainly there was nothing that would have portended that something like this was going to happen before it happened. And at this point, we're being told that the situation is at least well under control right now.
Yeah, and a number of resources coming in from San Antonio to a town of only 643 people, the population of Sutherland Springs. All right, Bill, thank you so much. We'll check in with you again. And we are awaiting, if you're just joining us, for a news conference to begin that we understand is going to happen at some point. We don't know what that point is going to be from local law enforcement and federal, potentially, state law enforcement as well, to talk about what has been going on over the last couple of hours, the numbers, the facts as they know them of what has unfolded in Sutherland Springs. This is a small town in a rural area of Texas, about 35 miles southeast of San Antonio, where it appears the shooter walked in and began firing at a large crowd that was inside of the First Baptist Church of Sutherland Springs. The numbers as we have them right now, law enforcement source telling us 27 who are dead, at least 27. The shooter dead as well in this shooting incident. There are 30 people who are injured. Those numbers continue to fluctuate. ABC news analyst Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI. Steve, we talked about the weapons that could have been involved from the good guys in the church, and in many states, that's something that the law enforcement either has to be thankful for when they show up, or it can complicate things as well when they show up and there are multiple people who are armed.
It could definitely complicate things when law enforcement shows up in this kind of situation, because even though there may be, regular citizens there in Texas who are carrying guns and they have the right to do so, they may not have the kind of tactical training on how to use that gun, how to deal with responding to a situation that's right in front of you, and how do you prepare for when law enforcement does show up, because law enforcement's dealing with a shooter, and they don't know who that shooter is. And if you're just a citizen who doesn't have a raid jacket or a badge or anything that identifies you as the good guy, how do you deal with that? And there's definitely training that's out there to advise citizens when they're carrying a gun, how they have to deal with the tactics of now using that firearm. But you have to make sure that there's not what you would call blue on blue or good guy on good guy. And it can be very complicated sometimes.
Well, and it was just on Friday. The police in Thornton, Colorado were saying that when they arrived at a active shooter last week at a Walmart in suburban Denver, that the first issue they had was multiple people were armed inside that Walmart, and it took them some time to figure out that the bad guy was actually gone, and they had to go and look at surveillance video and spend a couple of hours figuring out who the armed people were who were running throughout the store. So this is something that in today's environment, in states that would be more likely to have concealed weapons on a larger population of people, police say that, hey, it's totally legal. They have every right to do it. They may save some lives in doing it, the citizens, but it also creates this issue for them when they show up on the scene if people have their guns drawn.
Exactly. And the tactics for law enforcement, when they go through their respective academies and are learning how to be a police officer, the actual training session or the course of tactics, that's a very important course, because it's one thing that you are provided the uniform and the badge and the gun, and they're teaching you how to shoot that gun and the safety measures that are on the firearm. But the most important thing is, when do you draw your weapon? When do you use force, whether it's deadly force with a firearm or maybe a baton, or maybe you have to get physical and put your hand hands on somebody. Those are all aspects of law enforcement that are very difficult for police officers going through the academy to learn and then to put into practice on the street. So when you're talking about the public and the citizens that are carrying a firearm, and they are now having to decide whether they draw their firearm and confront somebody who's an active shooter, on the one hand, I mean, it is a good thing because that maybe can save lives. But then you also have to think about, if it's a protracted situation and the gunman is there and the public with firearms are there and now law enforcement shows up, this becomes a very complex situation. You never want blue on blue. That's the big thing. So that's something that has to be considered as we're looking at this situation here.
Yeah, and we just don't know right now what the situation was inside that church, if anybody was armed, if they played a role, potentially a very positive role in the outcome of this, or how the shooter ended up dying, if it was self-inflicted, if it was from a civilian, if it was from a police officer, law enforcement. We just don't know. Preservation of the scene, Steve, that now that we are several hours into this, the crime scene tape has grown. It's now a much bigger area. For a while, people were taking pictures right outside of the church, and now they've been moved quite a ways back. How important is it preserving that scene to make sure they have the outcome that law enforcement wants?
This crime scene is very important. They have to preserve this very carefully. It does sound like it's an expansive crime scene because my understanding what was being described is that the suspect may have gotten into his vehicle and drove off maybe a couple of miles away. So that is all a crime scene, a moving crime scene, but all of that has to be preserved. And the reason is, one, if there's still the potential that there is another suspect or suspects, you never know if the driver of the suspect who was the driver of the vehicle stopped at some point, let people out, wherever they stopped. I mean, there could be potential critical evidence that would indicate there's one or two other people there. So you have that. You have items of evidence that maybe got thrown outside of the vehicle. You have forensic evidence, blood, spatters. I mean, all kinds of different things that could have gone from the church over to where the vehicle was parked, all the way to where the vehicle ultimately stopped and the suspect died. So that is very important to preserve all that. And if there were people that were coming across and taking pictures and so on, they're probably going to be put aside and sequestered to some extent to figure out what did they touch, what did they do, and then they can figure that part out as far as chain of custody.
And we talk about the other scene potentially where the shooter is now dead. Does that make it more complicated, or does it help that you now have the gunman or gun woman, we don't know at this point, in a different location instead of being there at the scene with everybody else who was injured and killed? Or does it make it more complicated? You have two crime scenes now that you have to deal with.
Oh, it definitely makes it more complicated because you have a bigger crime scene, even though the vehicle and the suspect is, say, further away from the church, where that's clearly a mass murder crime scene. But it's definitely more complicated, just as we were just talking about, like the movement of the suspect. And not knowing exactly whether he is a lone gunman or maybe he had some assistance, just the mere expansiveness and the territory of the crime scene means that law enforcement and the searchers that are going to the people that are going to search the areas, they're going to have to go through every single inch of that terrain with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that if there's any evidence that got dropped or thrown or so on, that they're able to collect that, catalog it, and then analyze it to determine if that impacts the case.
In Wilson County, Texas right now, the unincorporated area, Sutherland Springs, it is now 3:23 in the afternoon, and police have yet to give an official update. Law enforcement of any kind announcing what went on here and whether anybody in the San Antonio area needs to be concerned about any potential threat in that area. But here's what we know at this hour: at least 27 who are known to be dead. The shooter dead as well in Wilson County. At least 30 people have been injured. Number of hospitals receiving the victims as they have been working on. We understand that the victims who have been coming in, Connolly Memorial Medical Center being one of them, close by what's going on. Others have been going to San Antonio as well, life-flighted on helicopters to San Antonio. It's been described that this is a town of two churches and a Dollar General, that there's not much in the town, that it is small town. It's not even incorporated. It is in the unincorporated area. President Trump today tweeting, "May God be with the people of Sutherland Springs." The FBI and law enforcement are on the scene right now, that he is monitoring the situation from Japan. In Japan right now, it is about 6 o'clock in the morning, 6:24 in the morning, and so we understand that from the White House that he may just be getting up and really getting a lot of the information from this. So, Steve Gomez, as we try to put all of these pieces together now, and we talk about the size of the crime scene, what needs to happen at this point to try to get these answers? Is it coming from the witnesses? Is it coming from the evidence? All of the above, because the shooter obviously isn't speaking at this point. And even if it's not terrorism, how much tracking of the shooter's last couple of hours are they likely doing right now?
Oh, they're doing a lot of everything right now. These types of mass shooter situations, as I've mentioned on a number of occasions where we've talked about these types of cases and attacks, it's an organizational exercise. The most important thing is to get sufficient resources on the ground where this is taking place, getting the command post set up where they can structure this investigation, because it has to move at lightning speed. You have to figure out if he was the only gunman and why did he do it. So you can then determine if there are other people out there that can do harm to other citizens. So you got to get as many people there as possible. The experts, there are people, as we've talked about before, that are just experts at crisis management, how to stand up this type of investigation. And once you get the resources there, then you have to methodically go through identifying who the suspect is, who were the people that were there who witnessed the person coming in, witnessed the shooting, witnessed the person going out, witnessed the person get into the car, and then ultimately when that person stopped and died, and were there any confrontations with law enforcement. You have to go through that person's profile as far as their social media, electronics, phone, computer, their resident, where they resided, not just where they currently reside, but where they have resided, trying to go back as far as you have to figure out what was going on in this person's mind, what triggered this attack. The weapons, you got to do tracing on the weapons. So that organizational exercise allows you to now go into every piece of this investigation that needs to be reviewed as fast as possible, so you can then start to come up with what is essentially going to happen pretty soon is a briefing that they can now announce to the public.
Your time at the FBI and LAPD, at what point do you say, yes, there is only one gunman? What makes that time when they say, okay, we are certain that there is not another gunman who is involved?
Well, the witness statements, that's the first thing. Was there only one person that came in, that was seen going into the church, that was seen leaving, in the vehicle? I mean, so the witness statements are very critical. If this person does have a social media or electronic footprint, be it texting, emails, and so on, by retracing what was going on with the suspect days and weeks before, they're going to be able to determine if this person was communicating with other people with regards to either the weapons, the use of the weapons, the training of the weapons, the acquisition of the weapons, and then ultimately going to the church to commit this attack. So they're going to be talking to the people, and then also the electronics, but then also the background on the individual. So it's always best not to make a definitive announcement if you don't, unless you know definitively that this was a lone wolf type of attack. But if it's not sure, then you have to just hold tight. You have to announce what you can announce definitively, and then say that you're still working on determining if there was one or more shooters that were involved.
And we have some new hospital information now, Steve, that at least 14 people are being treated in area hospitals. Connolly Memorial Medical Center says that they have received 8. They still have 3 who are in the hospital. 1 was discharged. 4 were transferred elsewhere. A number of other hospitals say that they also have. University Health System says that they have 5 adults and 4 children, a 10th person likely to be transferred from a rural hospital. So a number of the hospitals impacted at this point. Pilar Arias with KTSA, our affiliate in San Antonio. She is right now in Sutherland Springs. And what are you seeing? What are you hearing there now, Pilar?
Alex, I'm actually at the City of Stockdale City Hall, where the first official press briefing is going to happen. And this is 4 hours after we heard that this all unfolded. And as you guys have been reporting, we've heard, just under 30 people have died. One of the things that I've noticed, though, is that this is such a small town that even the reporters covering this are somehow impacted, because it's a rural community. We have Wilson County News and other media outlets here, and they're all showing up on the scene, hugging each other, and they're having to cover this shooting, this tragedy involving people that they know.
Sure, the town of 643 people, that everybody is going to be impacted or know somebody if they're not directly impacted. Do we know when this briefing is going to begin? We've been hearing about this now for hours. Do we know when they plan on doing this?
We do not. I don't know if they're waiting for everybody to arrive because there's so many outlets out here. I've worked out here for 2.5 years, and there's national media crews here. So I don't know if that's what they're waiting for. People are coming from, all parts of the state. We've got Houston, Austin, Dallas. So I'm not sure if that's what they're waiting for, but this is certainly, something that's, I guess maybe they're trying to dot their I's and cross their T's to make sure that they give out the most accurate information.
Yeah, because so far they haven't given out anything. So Governor Abbott's office telling ABC News that he is heading right now, they may be waiting for that as well, to Sutherland Springs, Texas, that he will be involved in a briefing at some point at a staging area there. We do have the name of one victim so far. The pastor at the church is saying that his 14-year-old daughter, Annabelle Pomeroy, is among the dead, that he says he was in Oklahoma at the time of the shooting, that every one of their close friends is among the deceased, and that he says his daughter was one very beautiful, special child. And Pilar, we have to assume that, as you made reference to a moment ago, that just about everybody in that town is impacted.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, in a small community like that, we've definitely seen that from others. Now, again, going over the medical center numbers, going a little bit deeper into them, that University Hospital in San Antonio tells us in a statement, quote, "We have received 5 adults and 4 children, with a 10th person likely to be transferred from a rural hospital. They have no conditions on them at this time." And they say any further updates are going to be coming, they hope, in the next couple of hours. Connolly Memorial Medical Center says that they received 8. 3 are still in the hospital. 1 was discharged. 4 were transferred out to a higher level of care, including airlifting. 3 ambulances also went out to hospitals in San Antonio as they tried to get them care that they just could not provide them in the Sutherland Springs, Wilson County unincorporated area. We know 27 people are confirmed dead, 27 more injured, according to sources who have been speaking to ABC News. ABC's Aaron Katersky joins me now. And Aaron, law enforcement across this country no doubt is paying attention to what unfolded here, wanting to know as well what was the motive, if there's any link to terrorism, which we don't have any indication there is right now, but that would be something that would impact so many other law enforcement agencies.
Yeah, it would be a follow-on attack to what happened here in New York City, Alex, just last week. And at the moment, as you say, there's no specific indication about the motive. And really, I'm struck by the number of police agencies, how few of them have actually put out statements. Normally that happens very quickly, but here in New York, for example, they've been preoccupied with the New York City Marathon. We have heard from Nassau County in Long Island, in the suburbs of New York City, to say that there's no specific threat to that area, but that cops would be paying attention. And I think because of the setting of this mass shooting at an ordinary place with ordinary people gathered on a Sunday morning for church, that's what has police curious about the motive here. Was this somebody who knew the church, lived in the community, and had a grudge, or was this something else entirely?
And at this point, it doesn't seem like that's clear, that maybe investigators on scene, that they know, but otherwise, at least publicly, they're not saying. And I go back to Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI, now ABC News consultant, and that's the big question here, what that motive was in this world of terrorism that we live in. But at least from what you're seeing here, you're telling us that this doesn't add up to terrorism at this point.
Exactly. And when I make these types of evaluations and I analyze these situations, I'm usually doing pattern analysis. I am looking at the various types of attacks that have occurred, not only here in the U.S., but worldwide. And you don't know for sure because, again, this is very early in the investigation. But typically ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and so on, they tend to want to focus on large gatherings. They want to focus, where there's a lot of media attention and so on. I mean, recognizing that this situation is just horrendous and it's getting a lot of media attention. But they tend. We've seen where they do their attacks and where they try to inspire their followers. Something like this tends to be something that, it's a smaller town, And you tend to think that this is something that is more personal, more connected to the people in this town, that there's some reason why this person decided to choose that church and to choose this town, and it's something more personal to that person, that suspect, and that's why we have what we have now. At the end of the day, it could be anything. Still, we just don't know what the motive is. But just based on the patterns that we've seen over the last several years, this doesn't fit into that category. It might fit in the category of domestic terrorism. It could be somebody that is an anti-government, an anarchist who had some conflicts with the people there in that town, and we'll have to figure out if that is the case.
Let's just say that the shooter is not from Sutherland Springs and is somebody that the people in that church didn't know. What road does law enforcement begin going down at that point?
At that point, they then have to dive into that person's life and try to figure out, where did this person live? Where did they work? Where have they had contact with people, whether it's personally going through cities and towns in Texas or online? Did they have contact with this church or the pastors or the congregation online? What was the cause for this person to come to that church, come to that city, and to commit this attack? There had to have been something, and that's probably what they're trying to figure out, at least preliminarily, before they give this press conference. They are trying to determine, is there something that at least indicates whether it's terrorism or not, whether it's an active shooter scenario based on personal conflict or not. Is this just something that's random? But even if it's random, if there is no connection, there is a reason why this person, decided to take this kind of action and chose this town, chose this city. Maybe it's because it is a small city, and this suspect believed that there wouldn't be the kind of security that they would find, say, in Los Angeles or Albuquerque or San Antonio, or a bigger city. So those are the aspects that they'll dive into on that suspect and that suspect's life, and that's going to be very important. And even then, it may still be challenging to determine what that motive was if there is no connection to that city.
Steve, thank you. I want to go back to Brad Garrett, also formerly of the FBI, now an ABC News analyst as well. And Brad, bouncing off of what Steve was talking about there, going in depth on the shooter and trying to figure out who this person was that law enforcement no doubt is doing right now. How far do they go? Who are they talking to? What are they looking at to try to figure out who he is?
Well, it's across the board stuff. They're going to look at his phones, in particular his cell phone. Does he have a social media profile? If he's from the community, it even makes it easier as to what his beef was, what was his issue with that particular church. Had there been a precipitated event prior to what occurred a few hours ago? And I'm going to guess at the end of the day, none of this is going to be complicated. It's going to be, people are going to look at each other and go, he committed this act because of that. But other than that, I think this is not going to be a big mystery. Much like Las Vegas is still sort of a mystery to us as to what happened exactly. So I just think this picture will probably clarify a lot quicker.
We touched on it earlier, but getting to that point of pulling the trigger, that if this turns out to be, and we just don't know right now, a local who was angry that who had a personal grudge against people in that church or a person in that church, what brings you to the point to say, okay, I'm going to carry this out, to make that snap happen? How do you get there?
Well, because it builds up over a number of weeks or months. The grudge builds up. The sort of internal rage builds up to where the person basically feels powerless to correct whatever his issue is. And what happens is they externalize that rage, and they blame it, whatever it is, on those around them or those they perceive caused this issue. And they basically reduce the folks to they're not human beings anymore. They're things that need to be eliminated. And that's why they can kill so many people in such a short period of time. So some version of that probably fell into place with this guy. Something may have happened in the last few days that said, that's the final blow. I'm going to take action now, and here I go. And, he clearly waited till Sunday during church service when at least a chunk, if not all the people he has an issue with were all in one room.
And to that point, if you think back to the Colorado movie theater shooting, that the gunman in that shooting thought of, according to those who interviewed him and psychologists and psychiatrists, that he thought of the victims as points. It was like a video game to him, and that he saw that when he killed them, that he got their point in a bizarre way of thinking, and that allowed him to live on then. But doesn't, Brad, mental illness somehow always come into this?
Well, of course it does. It doesn't usually come in. James Holmes is a different animal because he's just crazy, psychotic, delusional. These kind of shooters have severe mental health problems, but they typically are it's more personality issues that have driven them to commit these acts. So, yeah, there'll be something here, and my guess is we'll know that in fairly short order.
Brad Garrett, formerly of the FBI, now an ABC News analyst. As we wait for more information, we understand that there is going to be a briefing happening very soon. We don't have an exact time on it, but we expect to hear from state and potentially federal officials as well, describing what they know. Law enforcement officials telling ABC News that there are 27 victims who were killed in this shooting in Wilson County, Texas, unincorporated area of it. That the shooter is dead as well, and at least 30 people who have been injured in the shooting. ABC's Aaron Katersky, those numbers have been relatively stable over the last hour and a half or so. They went up very quickly. Now they have stabilized, but still, more than likely, they're going to fluctuate a bit.
And already some local outlets in San Antonio are reporting that the death toll may have gone a bit higher. But we'll wait for the briefing here. We can see the microphone set up at a podium. There's a piano in the corner. This is at a rural city hall not far from the scene. Reporters who were allowed remarkably close to the shooting scene had been pushed back now and finally outside of town, perhaps to give loved ones some room to deal with their grief. We had seen that happen in Connecticut as they tried to clear the school of the young children who were killed in the mass shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, and they moved all of us reporters away to a baseball field a few miles away just to clear out some space. But we wait to find out about the toll, but also about the particular motive, about the suspect, the circumstances of the shooting. From all indications, authorities do not have a clear motive yet, nor do we have a clear picture of exactly how this unfolded. There's no security at that church. From what we were told, the gunman was able to walk in unchallenged from the parking lot, do what he did, and then it's not clear whether there was an engagement with law enforcement, whether he shot and killed himself, but fairly quickly the authorities were able to say that the shooter was down, but not before killing at least 27 people inside that church.
And also different in this because of the rural area and so many people who were in that church being impacted that we're not hearing the witnesses. So many school shootings that the witnesses come running out and describe what they saw in there, or a mall or somewhere else that you get all of those who have seen it. That part really hasn't come into play here. We have heard from the pastor of the church who says tragically that his daughter was among those killed. The pastor wasn't there, though. He was in Oklahoma. He is now driving back to get to his church. But of those who were in there, it seems that they were impacted either directly or indirectly in some way, that they now are either talking to police and are in somewhat of a sequester, talking to law enforcement, or they're in a hospital and they're being treated. So because it is in a rural situation in a somewhat enclosed area inside that church, that it's not like many of the mass shootings that we have covered, unfortunately, so many times over the years. And we do wait for information to find out how this went down. Indications are that the gunman walked in and began shooting, and at least 27 people are killed, and a number of law enforcement agencies across the U.S. Are waiting for some information of exactly what this was. But we've been talking, Aaron, about how Brad Garrett and Steve Gomez, our analysts who were formerly with the FBI, they don't see the signs of terrorism here, but we just really don't know right now.
Yeah, not enough information to make a determination about motive, although it does not fit that kind of pattern. It does seem the choice of location, the nature of the victims, the close-knit community. It doesn't seem like that kind of thing, but we'll wait to see. By now, they've undoubtedly identified the suspect and are working to dig into that person's background to figure out what he or she may have been doing on social media, running down any known family or acquaintances to figure out, again, where this person's head was at the time of this shooting, just, 5 hours ago?
Yeah, not that long ago. Governor Abbott now heading to Sutherland Springs at his office, telling us that he's going to take part in this briefing that we expect to happen at any point. He wrote earlier, while the details of this horrific act are still under investigation, Cecilia, his wife, and I want to send our sincerest thoughts and prayers to all of those who have been affected in this evil act. He says, I want to thank law enforcement for their response and ask that all Texans pray for the Sutherland community during this, Sutherland Springs community during this time of mourning and loss. And a lot of those in Sutherland Springs, that's exactly what they've been doing, Aaron. We have seen those that weren't inside the church, and they don't necessarily know what went on inside there, but it was praying that was going on when this shooting occurred, and it's praying that's been going on in Sutherland Springs since then, as many in the community have been coming together, and they have been vocally giving prayer for those who they knew or were related to who were inside that church.
We have seen just some wrenching images of people reaching their hand out of a car window to grasp someone along the street as people come as near as they can to that church to just wait for word, and people frantically calling the phones of loved ones, leaving messages, making sure they can get in contact with their relatives. For the pastor of the church, Frank Pomeroy, this hit especially close. He was in Oklahoma at the time of the shooting, not present for this Sunday's service, but his daughter, 14 years old, named Annabelle, was there, and the pastor confirmed to us here at ABC News that she was among the 27 people who've been killed.
Yeah, saying he wanted to get that word out, that he wanted the world to know what a wonderful child his daughter was, and that she is no longer living after this shooting. He says just about everybody they knew in the community was in that church and has now been impacted. Go back to Steve Gomez, formerly of I now an ABC News analyst, and does that help this investigation that you have a tight-knit community where everybody knows everybody?
Yeah, I think it does. You're going to get a great cooperation from everyone. Everybody is going to come forward. They all know each other. They know the way their community works, and they are going to talk and provide details. They're going to be able to trigger each other's memories. Just when they're interacting with each other. I highly doubt that there will be any fact or piece of information that'll be forgotten. When you have something that's so significant like this occur, as we can all think about anything significant in our lives, you remember it. You remember every little detail, and that is what's going to happen with every one of those people that were impacted. When they are talking to law enforcement and the FBI, they're going to be able to recall everything that occurred, and that's going to help. That's going to help a lot with the investigation, because the details and the facts that are developed and gathered in this investigation, those are critical to try to determine ultimately what happened and why it happened.
It looks like this news conference is about to begin right now. A number of Texas Department of Public Safety officials are setting up the chairs, making sure that they've got enough room for the officials who are going to come in. The microphones are set up behind them. What looks like a stage area of this community center in Stockdale, Texas, nearby to where this is all unfolding in Sutherland Springs as they get ready. And again, this will be, now that we're 5 hours into it, the first time that we are likely going to get official information on exactly what went on. So far, it's been sources on the federal level who have been giving information about what this apparently was or potentially was not. But now we are going to hear from officials who will describe exactly what they do know at this hour. And we can expect, Steve, that 5 hours into it, they should know quite a bit now, especially if the gunman is dead.
Yes, they should know quite a bit. The only way they wouldn't know anything is if this person came from an area that was, say, outside of Texas and just randomly chose this town and this church to commit this kind of an act. I think it's highly doubtful that is the case. I mean, we got to wait and see what they announce. There is probably some connection, as we've been talking about, and if there is, it'll be fairly straightforward as far as this person was known to either come to the town, had interaction, and so on. That'll be probably easily described to law enforcement, and then at least they'll have some idea as to what triggered this.
on a investigation like this, when you have it in a rural area and it's now a large investigation, who takes command of this? Does the FBI come in? You think of the movies and they come in and say, we're the feds, we're here, we're taking this, or does it stay the leadership of the local sheriff, even if the local sheriff doesn't have many resources?
Well, I was the assistant special agent in charge in the St. Louis field office in Missouri, and we had a number of cases just like this. Not an active shooter situation like this, but a major case. One in particular I can think of was a baby kidnapping, and we rolled into the rural area and partnered with the sheriff. The sheriff had the lead, and that's the case, I'm sure, in this situation here. The sheriff has the lead. The FBI is there to support that sheriff and any other local law enforcement agencies that have the primary jurisdiction. They're going to support them with whatever resources needed: manpower, expertise, forensic, a lab, whatever it is that they need. They're going to provide that kind of support. Now, if there is some information about the motive that would indicate that it has dual jurisdiction, say something that's a domestic terrorism attack or something that would fall into the federal side, well, just the gun violation alone could potentially, or the gun use could potentially be a federal violation. Then they would work concurrently, the two jurisdictions, and typically what happens is you work that joint investigation. In this case, the suspect is dead, but if there was a suspect that was alive or other suspects to be charged, then they would consider which venue they would want to charge the person or persons. Basically, where do you get the most bang for your buck? Where's the best case to be made, state or federal? And then a decision is made jointly on that issue there.
And we just don't know at this point how far this is going to go. Likely law enforcement doesn't know either. Steve, thank you. We'll come back to you in just a moment. ABC's Aaron Katersky. It looks like we're getting very close here to this update. There's a lot of emotion, understandably so, in Sutherland Springs right now, and we wait, and the people of Sutherland Springs wait for an update as well to find out how and why this all unfolded.
I think so many people are waiting for news and hoping it is not the worst kind of news as they try to sort through the victims. 27 people that are known to be dead, another 27 injured and in various hospitals around the San Antonio area and beyond. And the authorities had been positioning a podium, getting everything set up so that this briefing can begin. We believe that Texas Governor Abbott is on his way to the scene, and so will undoubtedly want to be part of this. The FBI is on scene, and this is all happening a bit away from the congregation that was attacked, in order to give these loved ones some space to operate and away from the public eye. But we've seen terrible images of people holding on to one another, clearly grief-stricken, in a community of 643, where it seems everybody knew everybody. There is, this is a one blinking light kind of town, as it's been described, with a post office and the church and not much else. And so this is hit very, very close and deeply personally for many people.
Yeah, two churches and a Dollar General, as it was described today. That is a town like so many in Texas and so many of the states around Texas. And as you drive through, that there isn't much there, and that is the community that has been affected so far. We are also waiting to hear from the White House right now on if the president is going to be making any statement today. No indication that he's going to. He's in Japan holding meetings there on his international trip that he's on. He did put out a statement via Twitter saying, "May God be with the people of Sutherland Springs, Texas. The FBI and law enforcement are on scene." He says he's monitoring the situation from Japan. It's early morning there. We understand that the White House is, at least the crews that are with the president, are going to get rolling here shortly, and at that point they may get an update on if anything has changed. But so far the White House has not changed the schedule to say that the president is going to be making any statements. Number of hospitals around Sutherland Springs, around Wilson County, and also down into San Antonio have victims and are working on those victims right now. One of them being Connolly Memorial Medical Center. They say they got 8 victims who came in. A number of them have been released or have now been transferred down to San Antonio for a higher level of care. And Aaron, in these situations, so often the local hospitals are just overwhelmed, and either they can't offer that kind of care or they just don't have the space for that many victims, and they have to send them on.
No, right. And the San Antonio does have the benefit of Brooke Army Medical Center is there. They can help and have helped, and there is a good medical community in that area. They can go off to Houston if need be, or Austin where there's good medical care. But sadly, it seems that there aren't enough people that need this kind of help, Alex. That it just gives you an indication of how many people were inside that church and were killed. It's also notable, I think, that we haven't heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, from many, if any, eyewitnesses to this, because it just doesn't seem like there were that many other people around other than those who may have been directly affected.
You're exactly right. That typically in these situations, we would hear people who came running out and they would describe the horrors that were seen inside. Here, that's not the case. That it seems either they are talking to police and they are not in an area where we have heard from them, or they were impacted, that they were hit by gunfire, or a loved one was, and they're at a hospital with them right now. Go back to Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI, now an ABC News analyst. And Steve, we're now seeing on scene, it looks like an FBI evidence response team has arrived. We are not seeing the armored vehicles that so often we see on these scenes. What does it tell you that already the ERT is there, but not we aren't seeing all the armored response that typically we would see, that this was over very quickly, it would seem?
Yes, if you don't see the armored vehicles, then it usually means that there is no additional threat from either the suspect. Well, we know that the suspect is dead, or at least the one suspect, or other suspects. So they don't think that they are going to need those vehicles to, say, reach a door or to do some kind of search at another location, try to arrest some other individual. The ERT team, that's one of those specialized resources and the experts that the FBI has when it comes to gathering evidence from a complex crime scene. They are specially trained to deal with expansive crime scenes that where a suspect went from one place to another. They are very good at combing through needles and haystacks, so to speak, to find any little piece of evidence. And you're talking about just a traditional type of evidence, whether it's a gun, bullet fragments, and so on, but also blood spatter, any documents, everything and anything that can be gathered in a complex crime scene. The ERT team, they go through the training. They deploy all over the country and all over the world, and that's how they develop that expertise. So when you see the ERT team there, that is a dynamite team that the FBI has that they provide to local law enforcement to help them with these crime scenes. It's very good to see that they are out there right now.
And that evidence response team, other teams like it, were very active in Las Vegas. It can take them quite a while. I mean, they are looking for every fiber that they can find.
Absolutely. And they are going to take their time. They are under no deadline. There is no rushing the ERT team, because when it comes to crime scenes and gathering of evidence, especially very fine evidence, you don't rush. You are very methodical. You go step by step, inch by inch. Depending on the size of the crime scene, again, the organizational exercise methodology comes in, where they determine, okay, the size of the crime scene, where do we start? They're probably going to be starting at the church, and they're going to be moving from there. And of course, there's a timeline that's being built about the suspect and what was the suspect doing up until the point where the suspect showed up at the church, started the shooting, and then eventually left. And so they're going to be conducting that kind of evidence search, just moving methodically from the time the suspect shows up, where was that, where was he parked, and so on, and then all the way through the church and then going out up to the point where he's now in the car and then traveling to wherever he was stopped and where he died. So they are going to be organizing their search in that manner to coincide with the timeline, so they can then gather evidence that supports the timeline that they are developing right now.
There locally, it's now 4 o'clock. With the time change last night, we're looking at only about an hour left of daylight or so. How is that going to impact the evidence teams and what they need to do in there? Do they break at night because it's more difficult, or can they keep going?
They won't break at night, not in a case like this. If they have to, they'll bring in big light fixtures to ensure that there is enough lighting. They are not going to conduct the search, though, if they don't feel like they have enough lighting. They are going to preserve the crime scene, not let anybody come in. If there is a fear that the nighttime and the environment out there, if it gets cold, if that could disrupt the crime scene. If it becomes windy, if that will disrupt the potential evidence that could be gathered, they may continue on and use the light fixtures to try to continue to gather. If the weather and the environment doesn't impact their search and it's too dark, then they may hold the scene and wait till daylight the next day. So they'll make those determinations depending on how far they have gotten and what they're thinking that they're going to find, and their strategy with conducting that search across the crime scene.
Steve, I don't want to get too graphic here, but when you're talking about Wilson County, a rural area of Texas, and I don't know what their capacity is at their county coroner's office, but in your time in local and federal law enforcement, when you have a coroner's office that may be overwhelmed, what do you do? Do you bring in neighboring coroner's offices to help handle the bodies?
Yes, you bring in neighboring coroner offices. They may have a crisis center where by design, if they have a situation like this, they are able to take over that center, whether it's a community center, whether it's a gymnasium for a school or just a local place, where it's for the community. They'll figure out a place that is secure, where they can actually utilize it functionally and bring the bodies and whatever else they need to bring that they would typically take to the coroner's office. They'll have secondary locations, and if they did not have any of those kinds of locations already pre-planned, then they're thinking about that right now. And that's something that the logistical officers are doing with the local law enforcement, with the FBI. There's a whole staff within the FBI that handles the administrative side to deal with issues and decisions such as what we're talking about here.
Steve Gomez, I'll come back to you in just a moment. ABC's Aaron Katersky. We're beginning to hear from some others in the area around Sutherland Springs about the type of community and what went on around the area. We know from this specific church that the pastor's own daughter was killed. The pastor was out of town, and he's driving back from Oklahoma right now, and others in this area of what went on.
And we're also hearing from some who are coming near the church, desperate for word. One woman told the San Antonio Express News that her 13-year-old goddaughter was gunned down, and so it does seem like there are going to be a number of very young victims in this, Alex.
Sure, and Pastor Paul Buford of River Oaks Church in Sutherland, Texas, about 2 miles away from First Baptist, he says that they were in the middle of their church service when they got calls from friends. They had first responders who were at their church. They got up and left immediately. They started as a congregation praying in response to word that there had been a shooting. They said they've heard some news of the victims. They're not going to release any of that until they get it confirmed, but right now they're just asking people to stay away. The pastor and wife of the First Baptist were not in church today. We know they were out of town. They're on their way back to town right now. And we are waiting for this briefing to begin in a community center with a stage behind the podium, a purple door to presumably the outside, or to backstage, some sound equipment set up, a piano, small-town Americana that is now being turned into a briefing center for media showing up from around the world, and where we expect the governor will likely be. Governor Abbott has said that he is going to be attending a briefing tonight. We think it will probably be this one, that he has been en route. He put out his prayers and thoughts for the victims who have been impacted, also thanking law enforcement for their response. President Trump saying, "May God be with the people of Sutherland Springs, Texas." A number of statements going out, but we wait for this to begin right now, and no telling which direction this is going to go. ABC Steve Gomez, now an ABC News analyst, formerly of the FBI. We just don't know which way this is going to go. That it doesn't seem like the signs are there of terrorism, but we won't know until we find out what they know about that shooter who is down at this point, apparently away from the scene, who either shot him or herself or was killed by law enforcement or by a citizen who may have been armed. There are just so many questions right now.
So many questions. We got to wait for the answers. In this situation here, we really want law enforcement to take their time. Don't make any premature announcements. Really look at the facts, look at the evidence, look at the statements coming from the witnesses. Take your time. Make sure that whatever you do announce to the public in the press conference coming up, that either you know definitively that is the case, and if you don't, if there's still some unanswered questions, then say so. but don't lead anybody down a path that it's one motive or another. If you don't know, just say you don't know right now, and you're still investigating. Because I think that helps. Sometimes when you say that you're still investigating and you don't know, sometimes that helps the public come forward if they know something more. This individual, this suspect, may have lived in other parts of Texas or other parts of the country, and when law enforcement comes out and does a press release or a press conference and says there are still some unanswered questions, and if the public recognizes who that person is and they lived nearby or worked with them and so on, then more people come forward because they recognize that there's still information that law enforcement needs. So it's best not to overshoot what you're saying in the press conference. Just say what you definitely know, and if you don't know, just let the public know that that's the case as well. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Coming into an investigation like this, we've heard so many in previous mass shootings, so many law enforcement officials saying you have to come in without any preconceived notions, that you can't come in and say, well, this doesn't look like terrorism, so you start pushing it down that road. How important is it, even if you think you know what it is, to completely ignore that and just go off of exactly what you're seeing at that moment?
Well, yeah, you don't want to have tunnel vision. You want to leave all options on the table and let the evidence take you to where the answers are, so to speak, or what the final judgment is as to what truly caused this. So when you start getting tunnel vision, it takes you down a road where you focus on that one path. And sometimes, as we've seen in the past, there have been situations where they discount these other paths, because what happens is additional information and evidence comes in later on, and you may have thought it's this path or it's this motive, but then that additional information could make you go back and consider other alternatives, and you don't ever want to rule out those other alternatives. So you got to keep everything on the table. This, as I think Brad was saying, this could be something that's very simple, very straightforward as far as, why did this person do this? And we may find out in the press conference. But if not, then you have to keep all options on the table.
The FBI has an evidence response team. We now know it's been confirmed by ABC News, and special agents on scene in Sutherland Springs, Texas, to assist local investigators. The FBI victim assistance specialists are also being sent right now. We understand that they are on their way. Steve, what do they do? Obviously, they work with the victims, but are they looking for information, or is it more about comforting those victims?
Yes, it's definitely about comforting those victims. Now, the victim witness program for the FBI was very instrumental with the Las Vegas shooting recently. That is a classic situation where you had a lot of victims who survived the Vegas shooting, who in some cases had post-traumatic stress and had a difficult time. And the victim witness office and the program is designed to help those people. It's great that they're sending that program and those resources to the scene there, because you're going to have a lot of people that have survived this situation. And they're going to need help, and it's designed to provide them an outlet for discussion, for therapy if they need that, to be able to discuss what has happened to them, how it's impacted them, not necessarily to gather more evidence, to get more information and statements. The agents that are conducting the investigation are going to do that. The victim witness program is designed to help the victims and any witnesses to support them during this time, and not just within the next day or week, but it could be long term, because these types of situations impact people, for very long periods of time, and they're there to support those victims and witnesses.
The scene right now in the area where the shooter apparently either took his own life or was killed is one of an SUV, a white SUV that is in a field. Around the field is rolls of hay or something else around it. Looks like that the shooter rolled over an embankment or a curb area and then came to a rest. The body covered outside of the vehicle, just outside the driver's side door, with a tarp over the body, crime scene tape around that area, and then a number of law enforcement vehicles on the street behind it. We don't know how the vehicle got to that area from the church, what happened, why the shooter is now dead, of how it led to that point. between these two scenes, Steve, is there a more important scene, whether it be for them to investigate? Is it where the suspect is, or is it investigating where the shooting actually happened?
Well, I think it would be where the shooting actually happened. This scene right here is just equally as important because you want to know what happened at the very end. Just I'm watching it on TV right now, and it just kind of makes me think about how this situation that we're dealing with here in a very rural area where there are no, from what we can tell, no cameras that are covering every aspect of the crime scene. It almost takes us back 20, 30 years, in a major city where you didn't have cameras posted everywhere. And so you had to go through logical, traditional type of investigative efforts, talking to people, looking at the vehicle's position. Are there any, did it break? Were there brakes? And is there any rubber that's on the road that they can analyze? There's a lot of traditional type of investigative steps that are going to be taken in this situation because they don't have a lot of video, at least where this vehicle stopped in that area there. So, but I think the church is definitely the first place. They definitely have to focus on that area, not only where the victims, were shot, but that is the original crime scene, and then the location where the suspect was stopped. That definitely will be the next one as far as priority.
Inside that church, at least in past sermons and past services, that they have been recording those services and then they post them to YouTube. How vital, if they have a recording and a clear one, it looks like from their video recording equipment from previous services, is that video going to be to investigators?
Oh, that's going to be very important. They're going to be dissecting all those videos, trying to figure out if the suspect had attended the church services, and if he did, was that a form of reconnaissance to try to figure out how things were set up, what the timing was, and so on, or maybe that was just a situation where the suspect was at one point part of the congregation, was attending the services, and then there's something that's outside of the church that occurred where there was some friction that led to him coming back and shooting everybody. So, but at least that's going to be a key piece of evidence going back as far as they have to with the videos, depending on how long they hold on to those videos, and taking a look at those videos and trying to figure out, what does it say about the suspect.
And still, we wait right now for this news briefing to get underway inside a community center in nearby town where this is going to happen in Stockdale, Texas, where we expect to hear from local and state, potentially federal law enforcement officials as well about exactly what this is. We've been waiting for some time. Reporters have been sitting in the room. There is still not a certain time. We've just been told it's going to be happening soon of when we do expect to actually get this information from them. ABC's Aaron Katersky still with us here. And Aaron, a number of politicians have been weighing in now, as often happens after an incident like this. They've been sending out tweets with their own thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, and I'm struck by one from Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, who, of course, herself a shooting victim, saying her heart is with the people of First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs. And she then goes on to talk about the alarming frequency with which we watch terrifying scenes unfold in our communities. She called it devastating, not normal. Every single day, Gifford said, 93 Americans are killed with a gun in our country. And that's going to be a delicate political conversation, given how the nation responded after Las Vegas. But a number of other politicians have been weighing in to offer their own prayers and condolences. We just heard from the governor of New York, who accepted condolences when 8 people were killed here in this state after the terror attack, to say that his heart is breaking for the victims of the horrific tragedy in Texas.
And now he's the one putting his thoughts out there. Aaron, thank you. And going back to Texas and some of the laws in Texas, with Steve Gomez, in Texas there are very few, if any, restrictions on high-capacity magazines. If this turns out, and it sounds like that this gunman shot very quickly, that there may have been a high-capacity magazine in this, why does size really matter? What comes into it when it comes down to how the gunman was able to carry this out so quickly with so many victims?
Well, Well, the size of the magazine capacity is very critical from the standpoint of the only reason why you have that kind of large capacity magazine is unless you want to just go out to an open field and practice shooting 50 to 100 rounds in a matter of a few seconds. The only other reason is to commit a mass attack to kill as many people as possible. There's no real home safety to for such a magazine capacity. I mean, when if you're trying to protect yourself at your home, you and your family, you want to be accurate with your shooting, and having the ability to shoot 50 rounds in a matter of seconds doesn't really give you the ability to be accurate. So in a situation like this, if he's got a high capacity magazine for a long rifle, and you go into a church that has 50 to 100 people, you're going to be able to shoot as many people as you want and get out of there as fast as possible. And that it sounds like that's kind of the MO for the suspect. So I would expect there to be quite a bit of discussion as to the reason to have such magazines. And a lot of those magazines, in some states are prohibited. We'll have to see what the law is here in Texas, and depending on what the forensics come back on the firearm that was used.
Sure, and what role it played and what type of gun it definitely was. I want to go back to, from KTSA, our affiliate there, Pilar Arias, who is joining us again. And Pilar, you've been waiting a long time for this briefing to begin. Any action there? What are you hearing?
Alex, additional reporters, crews from across the state have shown up here. Supposedly what the holdup is we're waiting for Governor Greg Abbott. They have asked some of the cars parked outside to clear way to move so that way the governor can actually get in here. I will tell you that the people here of Stockdale have been extremely accommodating and welcoming to all of us. They're feeding us, surprisingly, and giving us water because they know that, we're going to be here for a while. It's already been more than 4 hours since this all started this morning, and so we still do not have anything officially confirmed. So we're waiting.
Is there annoyance from not the reporters but from locals there that they aren't getting more information, or does it seem that they're willing to wait for it until they can get it?
Well, I feel like the people, I believe we're about 9 miles away from the community center now over there in Sutherland Springs. I believe that they're getting more information than we are, whether it be from law enforcement officials or just from word of mouth. So if anything, I feel like they're more in the loop.
And it seems like as they have been gathering at several different locations that they have been somewhat sequestered and with law enforcement officials who may be giving them some information. Publicly, though, police have not put anything out officially. Law enforcement official telling ABC News, a source, that 27 victims plus the shooter are dead in this shooting. The scene last you saw it, Pilar, was what? You went by it not too long ago on your way to this news conference location, and what did it look like at that time?
It was expansive still. I would say it was about a quarter mile in front of the church, around the church, and there was a ton of crime scene tape. And normally, for scenes, they block it off, say a perimeter of like a square. But in this instance, the crime scene tape that I saw was kind of like crisscrossed and diagonal, which I don't know if that had specific meaning or purpose because they'd already pushed us back so far off the main highway, the main drag there. So I'm not sure the meaning of that. But there were still a lot of people outside speaking to law enforcement. So I'm not sure if they were in the church or outside of the church, saw or heard anything. Right now here in Stockdale, I hear a helicopter going by, but it was still a very, not necessarily active scene per se because, the shooting had stopped, but it was still an active investigation scene for sure.
And they're in Stockdale, so still no official word on when this is going to begin. It's just whenever the governor shows up?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right, sounds good. Pilar Arias with KTSA. Pilar, thank you so much. And we continue to wait for the governor. We know that the governor has been briefed on this. The governor has put out statements throughout the day saying that they're waiting for details to come in, but he sends his sincerest thoughts and prayers to all of those who have been affected by what he calls an evil act. The White House has not said if we're going to hear President Trump talk about what unfolded in what is now daytime in Japan, where the president is. He has a number of events on his schedule. He did put out a tweet earlier saying, "May God be with the people of Sutherland Springs, Texas. The FBI and law enforcement are on scene. I'm monitoring the situation from Japan," he wrote. We do believe the president is up now and about, but the White House not saying if there is going to be any kind of update. We would assume at some point, with the number of things on his schedule, that some comment might be made, but also a lot of officials may be waiting for police to put something out to say exactly what this is. Was this something local of somebody who knew the victims, who was angry and targeting? Was it terrorism? Was it something else? Nothing is out there. ABC's Aaron Katersky. One thing of note here, against the potential of this being a terrorist act, we're not hearing police come out and give any warnings that nothing is being tightened around the country. They're not saying that there could be a threat to people in the area. It seems that this is very much a closed case, that they don't feel there is a threat to people in that area or anywhere else.
It's a good point. In fact, the few police departments that we have heard from issuing statements at the in the wake of this, as we often do when one of these mass shootings or incidents happens, they're just saying out of an abundance of caution they're taking a look at this. But really, this does seem to be isolated to this rural church about 30 miles southeast of San Antonio. Now, we don't know whether that means they have nailed down a motive and are confident that there is no follow-on threat, or whether it just seems that way to police on the outside. I can tell you, Alex, that the authorities have preliminarily identified the shooter now. We have a name. We are not reporting one at this time. We'll wait for the press conference, which is due to begin here any moment. But it does appear that the man identified by authorities is a white male in his 20s from outside San Antonio. So an area man whose social media are now being scrubbed, whose known relations are now being sought to undoubtedly interview and hopefully give police a sense of why this happened.
So again, not a name that we can broadcast at this point, but a white male in his 20s from outside of San Antonio. And I take that information, Aaron, back to Brad Garrett, formerly of the FBI, now an ABC News analyst. And you heard Brad talk about scrubbing social media. Now that they have that much information and a name that they're preliminarily working off of, where do they go now? This seems like that now they're going down the right road of figuring out what this might have been.
Well, they're going down the right road. Obviously, things like the following. There's some belief I've picked up, I don't know if this is true or not, that he has a military history. What does that mean? Has he fought overseas? Was he associating with, fellow veterans in or around this community or someplace nearby? There'll be a lot because it's small and because he appears to be a known entity to the victims or the people associated with the shooting, that a lot of information in very short order will become available. And people will talk. I mean, just think about trying to get people like in the for example, in the New York car ramming last week, you get into some of these communities, they don't want to talk, they don't like the police. You tend not to have that as much in these rural settings because everybody knows everybody else. So they may well even have a preliminary motive at this point. So I think that that those pieces, along with obviously the immediate people in his life, if he's married, obviously she'll be interviewed. Is he employed? What's his relationship with this church, or does he go to another church? What changes in behavior has he had, if he's had any, at least on the outside, in recent times? Depression, talking darker, going to ranges more, acquiring more weapons. I mean, things we tend to see in mass shooters. Does any of those things? Because, what's interesting is that, we have some version of this conversation every time we have a mass shooting, and we had this, I think a number of us had it after the Las Vegas shooting, of which we couldn't find any of the above. Maybe the range part is still out there, and acquiring weapons clearly was out there, but boy, we just don't have much of a window on Mr. Paddock. I think this will be different.
Yeah, in the case of Stephen Paddock, they still don't know at this point, and we're a month after that shooting. Brad, thanks. We'll go back to Steve Gomez. And, Steve, the social media aspect of this, how important is that going to be, what he was doing online?
It's going to be very important. It's interesting that they've identified roughly his age, somewhere in his 20s. That's usually an indicator that this person, the suspect, would have some type of social media footprint. That's good from that standpoint as far as the investigation and being able to determine what postings or blogs he was putting out there, what is his state of mind, what are his positions that may be relevant to the investigation and why he did this. In the case, not to constantly refer back to the Las Vegas shooting, but in the case of Stephen Paddock, there wasn't much of a social media presence. So he's an older gentleman in that case, but in this case, we have a younger suspect. So there's probability that there is a social media footprint that'll be very important for the investigation to determine mindset, motive, and so on.
Yeah, again, what we're hearing from sources, a white male in his 20s from outside of San Antonio. They have a preliminary ID, as Aaron reported a moment ago. But beyond that preliminary ID, a name that we're not going to put out just yet, that they are trying to confirm if, in fact, inside law enforcement, if that is who they think it is. ABC's Jim Ryan is now in San Antonio, making his way to Sutherland Springs and the Stockdale area where this briefing is about to be held and the scene nearby. Jim, what are you hearing from your sources there in Texas?
A shutdown in terms of trying to contact physicians in the area. We talked earlier about putting hospitals and physicians on standby. Apparently, it doesn't expand much beyond San Antonio. We're not talking about Austin at this point. So presumably everybody who is injured is being cared for one way or another, and apparently fairly close to the scene of all of this. We're waiting for this briefing to begin to learn much more. Apparently, Governor Greg Abbott is going to be a part of that briefing. He's already issued statements about that, as have the two senators from Texas. But beyond that, we're still waiting for first official information coming out of the scene.
Yeah, the official information hasn't advanced very much, really, at all, since nothing official has come out. We do know that the gunman in this case is dead, and it appears the police believe that he is the only shooter in this case. The gunman, his body covered up by a tarp outside of a white SUV that looks like it went over an embankment or kind of off-roaded into a field, and then the driver outside of the door, the driver's side door of that SUV, and the body covered up right now. We don't know at this point how the gunman died, if it was self-inflicted, if it was a shootout with police, if it was a citizen who was armed, and that's a big part of this, Jim, that in Texas, a state you live in, that it wouldn't be uncommon for people inside that church to have had guns and to have responded.
Well, that's true. And even at a church, I think people who are accustomed to carrying guns, they have their concealed carry permits. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Texans do. And it wouldn't be too surprising that somebody just out of habit does put on a gun when they go to a church. I saw somebody at a store, a grocery store the other day, who was wearing a sidearm. So that's one thing that's allowed in the state. I don't know if that would happen, but I suspect that there might have been folks there who were concealed carry permit holders. At the same time, I understand that the vehicle and the suspect were found about 5 miles from the church. So, presumably, if there had been a shootout, the person might have died there. Of course, you never know. It could have been an injury, a fatal injury that was inflicted there at the church, and the person managed to make it 5 miles away before breaking out in that vehicle.
Yeah, we just don't know. Still so much unknown. All right, Jim, we'll let you get to the scene there and get more information as you're making your way in. And there are a lot of unknowns about what led to the end of the life of this gunman, and we hope to find out that information here in a moment as well. And still, ABC's Aaron Katersky, going back to the information that we have now on the gunman, very preliminary and very general at this point, but they are zeroing in on a suspect who they think likely carried out this shooting.
Yeah, we're not sure whether he was carrying identification or how they were able to make this ID, but they've preliminarily identified the gunman. ABC News does have a name, but we're not reporting it just yet. But the man identified by authorities is a white male in his 20s, his mid-20s, from right outside San Antonio, and authorities by now are looking at his social media profile. There's even some indication they've gone to his house in order to search for any explosives. That would be, I think, a matter of course, not necessarily a matter of threat. although we haven't been told. And they'd like to know immediately if there is any additional threat posed by this individual, even though he's dead, whether any of his associates knew in advance of what it is that he had planned to do, or whether this was a spur-of-the-moment thing or what. And we are still waiting for more information from authorities in an official capacity at a briefing that we were told would be getting underway by now. They're just waiting for the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, to get to the scene and to get briefing with the authorities so they can then share information with the public.
And we don't know at this point if the governor has arrived in Sutherland Springs and is getting briefed right now, and we're waiting for him to arrive at the location of this briefing in Stockdale, Texas, or if he is even in that area yet at all. His office has been saying that he's on the way. The number of reporters in the room has been growing as they are waiting for the briefing to get underway to get some official information about exactly what this was. What we know at this hour now, many hours after the shooting was carried out, law enforcement officials telling ABC News that 27 victims, that was the last number, 27 were killed, plus the gunman in this shooting in Wilson County, unincorporated Wilson County. And there are at least 30 people who have been injured. That the injury number may go down a bit just in the because we don't have that many people being reported from the hospitals that they are treating that many people who have been injured. Some of the hospitals, the one in the area around Sutherland Springs, says that they have already discharged about half of those who came in. The other half have either been are being treated or have been transferred to other hospitals in the area down into San Antonio, where they can get a stepped up level of care. No doubt, though, the hospitals around San Antonio, around Sutherland Springs, that they are very busy right now, and that they are dealing with these gunshot wounds that are coming in. Back to ABC, Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI, now ABC News consultant and analyst. And we have to assume, Steve, that like many of these situations, not all of the victims may have been gunshot wounds, but you also have to plan for broken bones of people trying to get out of there, of all kinds of different things, that injuries that people may have, like what we've seen in past incidents.
Oh, of course. Not knowing how many people were in the church, it sounds like it was a very fast shooting. So the chaos, not only from people going down, but then people trying to get out of there. There may have been a stampede. There may have been some trampling. There are injuries unrelated to the actual gunshots, but definitely some other injuries. And then, again, mental injuries. I mean, there may be a lot of post-traumatic stress that people are experiencing right now. So mentally, they may be just in a state of shock, in a state of terror, and that has an equal impact in addition to the physical injuries that people sustain in these type of mass casualty incidents. So they're going to be having to deal with that and factor that into how they're gathering information that's essential for the investigation.
Steve, let's circle back around to the security aspect of this. This is a soft target. We've known that soft targets are places that those who want to attack innocent victims, that they're going to go toward. You talk about churches. They don't have a lot of money, most of them, unless they're a mega church. What can they do? Is there anything they can do to stop something like this from happening?
Well, the one point that is prevalent with these kinds of situations, it doesn't matter where it is, in the rural Americana or in a big urban city, is that, and we have to see what the investigation bears out and what the announcement tells us in the press conference, but the fact is that usually there is some kind of connection between the shooter and the target, and there is some kind of suspicious activity or red flag behavioral indicators that are exhibited by the suspect leading up to the incident. And what sometimes happens is that people just don't think that the friction or the negative interaction that's occurring with an individual could lead to this type of situation. And so what's essential is that law enforcement receive notifications, tips, leads, some kind of information from whoever that puts it on their radar that this individual either has threatened somebody, or there's an incident that's occurred at the church where they ask the person to don't come anymore, or whatever it is, and that way law enforcement can do an evaluation, a threat assessment to determine if that individual that's being reported on poses a threat, and they may not. But law enforcement has to at least give it a good shake, as we say, to see if that person, has mental health issues, has made threats before, has been arrested, has a number of firearms to where they can actually carry out some type of threat, or whatever it is that they are saying they're going to do to the target. And they can then take whatever action is necessary. So it really requires at least some kind of notification to law enforcement to get the ball rolling.
And we've talked about it before in office place shootings, but where does it get to that point? And of course, police would do that threat assessment, but where do you go from, hey, somebody is angry, and we don't know what the situation was here, but somebody is angry, to somebody is going to carry out a deadly shooting?
Well, there's nothing wrong with calling up law enforcement and saying, somebody is angry. I've seen this happen many times at a workplace, at a big facility, warehouse facility, where there is a situation where there's an employee who isn't performing the way they should. They're trying to work with that employee, and then next thing you know, you start hearing that the employee is talking about, how they have weapons and they're going to threaten somebody. And at that point, in one example that I'm familiar with, they said something, and then action was taken. So you don't even necessarily have to have a specific crime that's being planned, but just the discussion of weapons and anger and comments is enough, whether it's law enforcement can then take action, or maybe private security that, whether it's the church or it's an employer, can bring in some experts to take a look at it, and then those experts can give them some advice and maybe some protection or maybe some action, and then it eventually brings law enforcement into the equation as well. So there's some things that can be done, but there has to be the discussion. There has to be the recognizing that there is a potential situation that exists and some kind of action needs to be taken.
As we await Governor Abbott here and other officials who are going to be briefing, we believe, here any moment in a town nearby in Stockdale, Texas. Stockdale is where the officials are going to give an update on what they know at this point. They have not given any sort of an update until this point. Everything has been coming from sources. And going back, Steve, to the security side of things, I mean, you can't put metal detectors in the front of every church other than looking for somebody who might be angry, who might be hanging around the area. Is there anything folks can do? It really comes down to that, I guess, see something, say something.
Right. It's see something, say something. It's a good collaborative relationship between law enforcement and the community. And the community is very broad. You're not just talking about the citizens that live in the community, but also, the churches, the employers, the schools. Everybody has to be talking to each other. They have to all, have that kind of communication to where if there is an issue with somebody, whether it's a student, whether it's an employee, whether it's somebody at a church, just knowing that there's an issue. And it doesn't necessarily mean law enforcement has to go knock on somebody's door to say, hey, we understand that, you've been thrown out of the school or you've been fired and so on. It puts it on their radar. And then if there's another indicator, another red flag, that's the key. It's when you start having a pattern of red flags involving an individual, that's when it kind of takes it to that next level where law enforcement has to say, okay, we've received a number of reports involving this individual, and maybe we need to go down to that house, knock on the door, talk to the person, see what their frame of mind is. Maybe we need to talk to some neighbors or some family members and so on, just to be preventative, to ensure that nothing happens. That's what this situation usually involves, is there were a red flag or two, and nobody really thought it was going to get to this point. And that's what we have to get past, is just having that kind of communication.
It was a quiet Sunday today. No red flags, according to those in the San Antonio area. A little bit humid today, but otherwise beautiful in Sutherland Springs, a town of about 634 people where this was where it unfolded. It was the late morning when a gunman walked in and opened fire, killing, at least we know at this point, 27 victims, plus the shooter is dead as well, happening in unincorporated Wilson County in the community of Sutherland Springs. At least 30 people have been injured in this as well, many of them being treated at hospitals. Some have already been discharged in the area as people wait to find out around Sutherland Springs what was the motivation for this attack on the people of the First Baptist Church of Sutherland Springs. And the answer just isn't there right now as they wait to find out more. ABC's Aaron Katersky, this was on a day when there were high-profile events across the country, including in New York City, the New York Marathon. There were marathons in other cities. Those didn't have the problems that some feared they might. This happened in small-town America in an area where there was no warning, apparently.
Yeah, just amazing. 2 million spectators came out to watch the marathon here in New York City today, Alex. There was heavy guard after last week's terror attack on the West Side bike path, and yet this happens in a place without any of that kind of attention in rural Sutherland Springs, Texas, just outside San Antonio, where a shooter was able to walk in, we're told, from the parking lot, unchallenged, open fire, and kill at least 27 people and injure another 27. That shooter is identified as a white male in his mid-20s. We're told authorities have been scrubbing his social media profile in the hours since this shooting unfolded. They've seen an image posted on social media from the suspected shooter that shows him showing off an AR-15 style semi-automatic type rifle. And so they're certainly going to be looking into the weaponry. They'll try to trace it. The ATF is also said to be on scene at his house. We're not sure if that's just a matter of course or because there's any follow-on threat. But now they're digging into this guy's background to figure out what may have led him to the door of this church on a Sunday.
And again, on that social media, Facebook recent days showing off an AR-15 style looking gun and may have had a military background. Aaron, thanks. Go back to Steve Gomez. Steve, from that, does that tell you anything now that he's been identified by authorities as a white man in his 20s from outside San Antonio on social media, Facebook in recent days showing off this AR-style gun, may have had a background, and now they're trying to put the pieces together of why he carried this out.
Yeah, the pieces of the puzzle are coming together. So at least we know that he is from just outside of San Antonio. Probably, it sounds like it's close enough to where this attack took place, to where he may have some familiarity with the town or the church or the congregation. Showing off that rifle. That's one of the red flags that we're talking about. Maybe he didn't say anything about going down to the church or going out and killing somebody, but just showing that off, that by itself doesn't mean anything. Anybody can take a picture or make a posting of a rifle or whatever. But now what were the other red flags that were popping up? And that's something that the investigation is going to have to look into and bear out.
When you hear that he had a military background, does that tell you anything except that maybe he was familiar with guns?
Well, it definitely tells you he's familiar with guns. I mean, there's definitely training involved there. What it does, it then asks the question of, did he serve in combat? Did he serve in an environment where he maybe has post-traumatic stress or had some kind of some type of injury, some type of situation that has now impacted him mentally, or did he have some, just adverse situation while serving that he's carrying around, and it's now something that he's acting on in this situation here? So they're going to dig into his background, his military history, to try to figure out what occurred with this individual. Was he honorably discharged, dishonorably discharged? Were there issues that came from his time in the military? That's something they'll have to look at.
I'll bring back Brad Garrett, also formerly of the FBI, now ABC News analyst. Also hearing that the ATF may be at his home. How important would it be to clear that and to make sure that there are no explosives or any more weapons inside that home?
Well, you just have to do it, even if you don't think there's anything there. Did he have an additional arsenal there? When did he buy the AR-15? I want to jump back to the social media for a second. It is important when he posted the picture of that AR-15. Was it recent? Was it not? I mean, if he doesn't have much of a social media profile, and all of a sudden, I'm making this up, 2 days ago, 4 days ago, he posts that AR-15, there's significance in that. Now, what does it mean? I don't know, but it certainly may mean something to him. It may mean something to his wife. As Steve mentioned, and you and I talked earlier, if he was in combat, what does that mean? Are we dealing with somebody that's troubled here because of their past experiences, which, change your morality, can make you angry, can give you impulse control problems, can, do all sorts of things. So I don't know, all of that stuff now. So if any of that's relevant, you're probably going to have to get the VA involved to see what you've got with this guy. But if this is these are just so difficult sometimes to really sort of put your finger on. Yes, but you said X, but why in the world would that trigger this sort of mass shooting? And that's where you have to get to. And again, in his mind, it was clearly the right thing to do. But to the rest of us, we were going to go, are you kidding me? You would kill 27 people, injure dozens more just because of that. And maybe that'll help us down the road. Maybe it won't.
And we do understand, we don't know an exact timeline, but it was recent days that he was showing off that AR-15 style looking gun. What does that tell you if it was within the last couple of days?
Well, it tells you that he's gearing up. He's letting you know that that's a major part of his life. I mean, somebody mentioned to me a few minutes ago that there wasn't much on his social media, that maybe that weapon, maybe a picture of his kids. I think he has children. Maybe his wife. If that's all that's up there, then that's maybe the three most important things to him, that the AR-15 is there to make some sort of statement. I don't know. I mean, again, as I said earlier, it is important to know when he posted that.
White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders is telling us now that the president has been briefed several times. He's in Japan right now on his international trip, that he's continuing to receive regular updates on the tragic shooting in Texas, saying that the president spoke with Governor Abbott earlier today. They're going to keep everybody posted, they say, from the White House with more details, that the president's thoughts and prayers are with all the friends and families affected, saying may God comfort them all in this time of tragedy. We don't know at this point if we are going to hear from the president today, to actually hear his voice. He has a number of events in Japan that he is going to be attending today, where it's now morning time in Japan. Monday morning, and there's a likelihood that he may make a comment at some point, but we don't know when that's going to happen. It could be during the overnight hours here in the U.S. So I want to go back to ABC's Aaron Katersky, who has been tracking down a lot of this information on the gunman and what we're beginning to learn. And again, some of the details that we now know, Aaron, are what on this guy?
Well, he's in his mid-20s. He's a white male, and he's from the San Antonio area. Doesn't appear to be from Sutherland Springs itself, although very few people are from Sutherland Springs, this unincorporated area of a county southeast of San Antonio. And so he is from the area. Whether he has any ties to the church that was shot up today, that's unknown, at least to us so far. And authorities have been going through his social media profiles. They've been looking at different accounts. There's one social media profile that indicates a military background. There's another that shows him showing off a semi-automatic rifle. And so they're starting, at least, to get a picture of the guy, Alex, and whether that is able to get them any closer to motive, we'll see when they talk to us here shortly.
And we're hearing that federal law enforcement may be checking out his home, which would not be uncommon. We hear about this typically, whether they do or don't believe anything is going on at that house, to figure out if there's any more evidence there or any kind of booby trap or anything else. You mentioned the size of this community and that there aren't many people from the Sutherland Springs area. It's because it's 643 people. That's the population of Sutherland Springs, and that's why this briefing that we're waiting on is going to be held outside of the town itself in Stockdale, Texas. Sutherland Springs, not a very big town. A couple of churches, a store, and a post office, and that's about it. A number of neighborhoods, and not a lot of, when it comes to real infrastructure or business, besides that, about 35 miles outside of San Antonio, where the folks who live in Sutherland Springs live. But still so many questions. The numbers that we have as we are finding out more, as Aaron's been reporting on the gunman here, that we know that 27 people, police believe, have been killed. The shooter is dead as well. The shooter, his body is covered by a tarp outside of a white SUV in a field about 5 miles away from the church where the shooting happened. There are lots of questions about how his SUV and how his body got there, if there was some kind of chase, if he killed himself, if he had been shot by somebody inside the church and then bled out at that point and couldn't control his car any longer. Was he shot by police? Suicide? We just don't know at this point, and we're waiting for a briefing to begin that we've been waiting for hours now for the briefing to begin. The microphones are set up. Governor Abbott, who we understand has been talking to President Trump today, he is en route and going to be holding that news conference there, and we continue to wait for the information. We know there is an evidence response team on scene at the church right now. ABC Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI and now an ABC News analyst, that evidence response team is going to be hard at work tonight.
Oh, yes, they're going to be working through the day, night, potentially defend what they're still looking for into the next several days. A lot of times they're going to hold the crime scene for several days, maybe even they'll gather evidence and whatever they can get from the crime scene, but then there may be other bits of information that they are collecting from, say, other locations, residences that they're doing search warrants at. Also, they're also going to be doing witness statements, and that may lead them to other information that indicates that they have to go back to the original crime scene. So they'll probably hold on to that crime scene for several days, if not weeks.
Well, and everything that went on inside there, completely understandable. That it sounds like they have a number of bodies who are inside, other victims who were transported to hospitals and died at those hospitals. Still, so many unanswered questions. Again, reporting what we've been hearing from Aaron, that multiple sources telling ABC News that authorities have preliminarily identified the shooter. The man being identified by authorities as a white man in his 20s from outside of San Antonio. They have been scrubbing his social media profiles on Facebook in recent days. He showed off an AR-style looking gun. LinkedIn account indicates he may have had a military background, and what role that may or may not have played is not clear right now either, as we await the new information to come in. A number of politicians have been tweeting out today their thoughts and prayers included in them. Officials from New York, who just several days ago were accepting those well wishes from other areas of the country because of their terrorist attack in New York. If this was anything linked to terrorism, we just don't know right now. We've heard from our analysts saying it doesn't seem to add up that way, but it's unclear since the official information hasn't been given. The news conference, the briefing, is expected to begin at any moment. Reporters have been set up for hours. The podium is set up inside a community room in front of a stage inside a nearby town, and we await the officials walking in. Everybody's been ready for some time to get that official information. Our teams are on the ground right now. ABC's Jim Ryan, others are there as well, and we await the information that they're going to begin gathering as they get in to Sutherland Springs to get that information too. ABC's Aaron Katersky back with us now, and Aaron, the latest information coming in.
Latest information involves a white male in his 20s, and he was somebody that we're not sure belonged to the congregation that he attacked, but somebody from the area, from the San Antonio area, and who could conceivably have been familiar with the church, its location, and with some of the people in it. Now, separate from that, the authorities who are working with this name have been going through his social media profile. They've been trying to track down known associates. They've come up with a couple of different things. One, on a Facebook profile, there's a picture of the guy showing off an AR-15 style semi-automatic rifle. Whether that's ultimately significant or not isn't clear. There's another social media profile that indicates the gunman may have had a military background. The only thing we know for sure about the gunman is that he's dead. How he was killed still has not been made clear to us. There's some thought he killed himself, some 5 miles away from the church. There's some other thought that perhaps he engaged in a shootout with police and was killed that way.
Still so many questions that need to be answered. And as we get a better look now at the church itself, outside the front sign reading Fall Fest, past the date that it was actually held, but October 31st, a Halloween festival that of sorts that they had at that time, but it was a fall festival for their church purposes there on October 31st. We know that in a sermon just a week ago. The pastor saying happiness is the Lord, leading off that service a week ago. They put many of their services up on social media and on YouTube, that it was no secret what was being said inside these church services or what message was being passed along. The pastor of the church was out of town today. He was in Oklahoma. His daughter was among those killed. He has spoken to ABC News. He is driving back to his church area of Sutherland Springs to get back there to be with his congregation, to be with his family as well. But his own daughter is among the victims, only 14 years old. I go back to Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI, now ABC News analyst. And again, knowing that the sermons and the services were recorded and something that had been posted online, one, could that also be looked at as a possible motive, that this could have been somebody who didn't like what they heard from afar, not that he was too far away, but not right there? And then what kind of evidence could that be if today was being recorded?
Yeah, well, exactly. And part of that is going to be based on whether he was a member of the congregation. Was he attending that church? Did he have a certain mindset or ideology when it came to religion? And while he was there, he was hearing the sermons, and that contradicted with his ideology and his mindset. And so that's where those videos are going to be very important. Maybe even if those videos are able to show his facial expressions, was he disturbed by whatever he heard in the church, and that contributed to what he was thinking, which led to what we have with this attack. So the video is going to be very important, especially if he was attending church services and that we're able to see what his reactions were.
ABC's Jim Ryan is now live outside of the church in Sutherland Springs. You've arrived there on scene, Jim, and describe the scene. What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's just a small rural neighborhood out here, sort of to the southeast of San Antonio, near the town of Lockhart, where this news conference will be happening today in Wilson County. Still cars lining the street, people walking up and toward the police line that's been established. Yellow tape across the street blocks it to keep people from getting too close to the church, which is just over the rise from where I'm sitting right now. A fire truck here on the scene, and again, civilian cars all lined up as well. People outside their homes. This is, again, it's a very rural area, small houses, mobile homes along the route here, and cars just almost everywhere you look, Alex.
How much activity is there on scene right now? Does it seem like things are relatively calm, or there's still resources pouring in?
No, it looks as though things have calmed down substantially. From what I can see back here at the line, at the police line, it looks clearly as more like an investigation than an emergency response at this point. A fire truck has just pulled up alongside where I am, and again, there are civilians walking around out here as well. A woman walking past with her hand over her mouth, walking up toward that police line, Alex.
The area around there, in so many of these shootings, we would see loved ones up against crime scene tape, waiting for information, trying to find out if their loved ones are okay. Are they there, or have they been brought somewhere else? I guess it could also be that this is such a small community that everybody involved is somewhat close to it and knows what's going on.
Well, exactly, and I think that's the case. And I have a woman back behind me here standing against her pickup truck talking on the phone, another one driving past. And I think that you're right. A small community, only a few hundred live here. And considering the number of those who were injured, the casualties, I think it's safe to assume that a lot of people knew those folks inside that church, and they've already gotten the tragic news about whether they lived or died.
Which is the same reason why we haven't, like we typically do, heard from a lot of witnesses coming out of there, that those who were close to it were affected. Either they were shot themselves or their loved ones were directly impacted, and they're now helping them out with the emergency services and with medical services right now. So who you're seeing on scene there, a lot of firefighters, a lot of investigators, FBI agents as well, Jim?
It looks like, yeah. Plainclothes people certainly up there at the line, at the police line, and that sort of person. Not firefighters in turnout coats, but more investigators. There's a fire truck that just pulled past with a feeding component on the back of it. I think they're digging in for a long investigation here, Alex.
Jim Ryan, live on scene there. You just arrived on scene. We'll let you go gather some information. We'll come back to you in just a couple of minutes. Again, what we know at this point He's multiple sources telling ABC News that authorities have preliminarily identified the shooter. The man identified by authorities is a white man in his 20s from outside of San Antonio. They are right now scrubbing his social media. They have found on Facebook in recent days he showed off an AR-style looking gun. A LinkedIn account indicates he may have had a military background. It now appears that federal agents are at his home, that they are doing some sort of investigation there, potentially looking for explosives or more firearms or more evidence or booby traps of some kind. No indication that they have found anything. Any moment now, we expect to hear from officials, but we have been expecting that for hours on this briefing that has been promised at a community center in Stockdale, Texas, which is just down the road from Sutherland Springs, where this briefing is going to happen. The numbers, 27 who have been confirmed dead, we understand from officials. That number may fluctuate a bit up or down. 30 others who have been injured as investigators look for the answers of why. The gunman is dead. That gunman outside of a white SUV in a field covered by a tarp at this point. But a lot of questions, and we hope to get the answers of how that gunman died. Was it a shootout with police? Was it a Good Samaritan who opened fire, somebody who was carrying and shot the guy? Or was he did he commit suicide? All of those are possibilities right now, and police aren't giving those answers. ABC's Steve Gomez, now an analyst, formerly of the FBI. Steve, does it really matter how he died? Does that say anything toward the investigation if he killed himself or if police killed him?
Well, it does say a lot. If he killed himself, then it was kind of a situation where he knew he was going to go in, kill as many people, and put an end to his life. If police killed him, then there's the potential that he was trying to escape, and for all we know, he was going to go to another location and commit another attack. So that's what's so important about the search on his vehicle. Was there other ammunition? Search of his residence. Did he have explosives? Did he have other weapons that he was going to use? So it's very important to determine which way that occurred, whether it was suicide or death, by confrontation with the police, because the potential for there to have been another attack is great, and we have to consider that right now, and I'm sure they're considering that with the investigation.
In Sutherland Springs right now, it is 5 o'clock in the evening. The sun is going to begin setting very soon, which could have an impact on the investigative side of things, of collecting evidence, which they're doing right now as we continue to try to get answers as we move forward on this, learning more about the suspect, learning more about the scene and how it happened, and trying to figure out why. That question so many have, why? I'm Alex Stone, and you're listening to live coverage from ABC News. It was a Sunday morning, a church. The congregation was inside the First Baptist Church of Sutherland Springs, about 35 miles southeast of San Antonio, Texas. That's when a gunman walked in for unknown reasons and began shooting. At least 27 people are dead in Sutherland Springs, Texas. 30 more are injured, and now law enforcement is trying to piece together why this happened. The president tweeting out today, "May God be with the people of Sutherland Springs." The FBI and law enforcement are on scene. He says he's monitoring the situation from Japan, where President Trump is right now, for a number of meetings. The White House saying that he has been briefed numerous times on this and will continue to be briefed as well. Governor Abbott in Texas is heading toward the area right now. He has been briefed as well, talking to the president. We know that they have talked to one another, but we expect to hear from the governor whenever this briefing does happen, nearby the scene just down the road from the shooting scene, once the governor arrives there and is able to brief on the facts that he knows at that point. ABC's Aaron Katersky with me now. And Aaron, the latest information coming in.
Latest information is a confirmed identified suspect. The Texas church shooting suspect, according to multiple law enforcement sources, is 26-year-old Devin Kelly from nearby New Braunfels, Texas. That's just outside San Antonio, as is this church that he shot up. He was later killed, and we've spoken to a congressman who represents the area, Alex, and he says what he's hearing is that the suspect was actually shot at the church, sped away, and then was finally killed about a short time later, about 5 miles away from the church. But we're still waiting for the specific timeline of how these events unfolded. According to this congressman, the gunman, identified again as 26-year-old Devin Kelly of New Braunfels, Texas, walked into the church with gun blazing and then somehow became shot and then ended up dying about 5 miles away.
And we don't know from the congressman who did the shooting back at him, if in fact that's how it unfolded. Was it law enforcement or somebody who was armed inside that church?
It doesn't seem terribly clear, and the congressman himself was still getting some information, but the authorities are telling us that they haven't fully, officially haven't fully have a tick-tock of how this all went down, but it does appear that there were a number of people immediately on scene as soon as the shooting happened, and whether one of them was able to engage the suspect or whether he ultimately shot himself, that's what we're waiting to find out.
And let's take this information back to Steve Gomez now. And Steve, your time at the FBI, that now we're hearing that potentially that the gunman who has been identified is, according to our sources, Devin Kelly from New Braunfels, Texas, that if he had been shot by somebody inside that church, if it wasn't law enforcement that just got there that quickly and shot at him, that this may have been a moment when you have people inside that room who are armed, that there may be a hero in there somewhere.
Exactly. And that is going to be very important to figure out what led to him ultimately dying. If it wasn't self-inflicted suicide, and if it was somebody at the church who was armed, then yes, you have a potential hero. Now, there were a significant number of deaths and injuries in this incident, but it's going to be very interesting to see if it was somebody that was armed in the church and they shot back, which led to him dying. What were the circumstances of that shooting, of that response by the private citizen who was armed? And then what led to that suspect then leaving and driving off, and the circumstances that led to ultimately his death. So this is a very interesting aspect of this investigation. This could be why there is a further delay in the announcement and the investigation being conducted by law enforcement, because that's a different aspect of a situation, of a mass shooting that we haven't really seen. It's usually law enforcement or the active shooter taking his own life. I can't remember recently there actually being a private citizen who's armed that took matters into their own hands, by necessity, and was able to stop the situation.
If, in fact, it goes down this road, if that's what did happen, this may change the narrative from police departments who have said that, we just heard it last week in Colorado, that they were dealing with an active shooter. They showed up and private citizens had guns out and that it slowed them down. That this may go the other way where they say, look, this is when it really does help, and that they got potentially help in this situation.
The location,
sounds like Steve.
Again,
there we go. Now I can hear you, Steve.
Okay. We also have to consider the situation and the environment. We were talking about a rural area where there's a limited amount of law enforcement personnel that's in the area there, where the FBI has small offices in the general area. But if you're talking about a location where the law enforcement response and their presence is just not going to be as visible, and then you have a situation where a church where there's a big congregation, then yes, having people armed and trained to respond to a situation like this, it's a benefit to law enforcement and to the community, because now you have additional people that can respond to a situation. Let's see what happens in this case here, if that was the case, a person taking action and saving people.
Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI, now an ABC News consultant. Steve, thanks for coming back to you again. The new information that we have in the last couple of moments here, you heard Aaron report it. We report the name of the suspect, Devin Kelly, from New Braunfels, Texas, now dead, next to his white SUV. We suspect it's his, but next to a white SUV. Multiple sources telling ABC News that the man now being identified, Kelly, as a white male in his 20s from outside of San Antonio. On social media and on Facebook in recent days, he was seen showing off an AR-15-style rifle. A LinkedIn account indicates that he may have had a military background, but they are trying to look into that background right now. ABC's Jim Ryan is live on scene now in Sutherland Springs, Texas, just outside the First Baptist Church. where there has been a lot of activity as investigators are now beginning to look inside that church and try to collect evidence, Jim.
Yeah, and trying to get to the heart of the matter, why this might have happened. And people out here in these neighborhoods now, word spreading around about what happened here. Kristen Hansen was at work. She works in Seguin, not too far from here. Around 11 o'clock this morning, she started hearing the news. Tell me, Kristen, what were you hearing and what did you do at that point?
Well, I had gotten a text from one of my best friends, and she's like, there's something happening at the church. There's a bunch of cops and stuff. So I didn't think anything of it, and I couldn't really be at my phone because I was at work. Well, then my mom texted me 911, so she called me, and she answered me. She's like, there's been a shooting at Silent Springs. She's like, don't go home. And so we tried getting a hold of my grandma. We finally found my grandma, and then I just told my mom, I was like, I'm going to come straight home.
Did your grandmother attend this church?
No, she goes to Lavernia.
Okay. Now, you live 3 blocks away from the church down here, right? And you hear something like this happen. In Sutherland Springs, we heard Las Vegas, we heard New York last week, and now Sutherland Springs. What does that make you think?
I don't know. It's just crazy. I don't know what the world's coming to now. Yeah, I was like, we're in a small town. Nobody thought that would happen. I was like, everybody knows everybody, and just for that to happen is a big shock.
And you might have known somebody who was inside the church, I understand, or a relative of someone who was there, right?
Yes. Her name is Maggie Vidal.
And that was her. It was one of her relatives, though, right?
No, she was in there. Maggie Vidal.
And how is she? Have you heard how she is?
No, I haven't.
Are you concerned about that?
Yes. But I believe they sent her to the hospital in Forestville. But that's about it. That's all I know.
Yeah. You've got to feel fortunate that you weren't here at home 3 blocks away when this thing when it happened.
I know. Yeah. I know my grandma said she got out of the shower and she heard noises, but she didn't think anything of it, and she left. And I was like, why would you leave?
It might have been a good thing.
Yeah.
Kristen Hansen lives just about 3 blocks away from the church here, First Baptist of Sutherland Springs. She was at work at the time, and now she, like everybody else in this neighborhood and in the whole town, Alex, is hearing word now about the identity of the shooter. And they, like everybody else, I think, is looking for reasons, looking for answers about why this happened, Alex.
And Jim, is the name is just coming out. Are people there saying that this is somebody who they think they knew, or they have no clue who this guy is? I understand they may not have heard the specific name, but it's not somebody that everybody's talking and saying, "Oh, we know that guy."
Well, you know, the way social media is now, everybody does know the name here in town. It doesn't ring a bell to most people. It certainly didn't to Christian. Apparently, this guy lived in New Braunfels, which is outside of San Antonio, the other direction, but more toward the hill country. And they're shaking their heads and saying, "We just don't know who this person might have been."
All right, Jim, thank you so much, and thanks to her as well for telling her story. And again, I bring it back to Steve Gomez. And, Steve, now that we're finding out somewhat of a ways away from Sutherland Springs that this guy may be somebody that people in town don't know, what does that mean? Where does this lead us now?
Well, there has to be some connection between him and either the church, the leadership of the church, some of the congregation of the church. We have to assume that there is something there. As we've talked about with Las Vegas and Stephen Paddock, how it's still to this day undetermined as to why he committed that attack. It's always possible that it's going to be a random attack, but you have to assume that there is going to be some type of connection, even if it isn't a physical and personal connection where he had personal interaction with an attendee of the church or the leadership, or he had attended the services. Maybe it's something online, and that's where that social media and that online internet activity that the suspect engaged in, if that crosses over into some kind of activity involving the church, then that could be the connection that we're looking for to determine if that was the motive. So I think there's going to be the assumption that there is some kind of connection until they exhaust every aspect of the investigation.
And again, all of these services were put up on YouTube, so there's always that potential that somebody, in this case, the suspect, didn't like something that he heard and decided to retaliate in some way.
Exactly. That's always the potential. They're going to have to look at and compare, what was discussed in the services that were videotaped and put online, and match that up with his mindset. and his ideology, and how he viewed either what was said in the services, or maybe his view towards religion, and see if that contrasts or how it compares to what was shown in the videos during the services there at the church. So that's definitely something. I'm sure they're doing that right now. They're trying to figure that out, what was said and what was shown in those videos. And Matt set up with his profile.
We may get some of these answers at this briefing, when it and if it eventually begins, that has been planned here for the last couple of hours, but we have not yet heard from officials on exactly when they plan on holding it. ABC's Aaron Katersky with us here, and Aaron, we are learning a lot more about who this guy apparently was.
Devin Kelly was his name, 26 years old, from nearby New Braunfels, Texas, and possibly had a military background. We're still waiting for the Air Force to verify. But on social media, he was depicted recently holding an AR-15 style semi-automatic rifle, and authorities are going to be digging into his full social media profile and running down any known associates. The FBI, we're told, is already searching his home. The ATF, we were told, had also been out there just to make sure there weren't any additional threats from him in the form of explosives or other weapons. And authorities are trying to understand why he targeted worshipers in this rural church 35 miles southeast of San Antonio.
And not all that close to where he lived. It wasn't right down the street. It was on the other side of San Antonio, and why making that trip. Aaron, thank you. And again, as we wait this information coming from the official briefing that we expect to hear in the next couple of minutes, we know the basics of what happened. We now know that he walked in to this church about 35 miles southeast of San Antonio, opened fire for some reason, apparently, according to one congressman, that there was potentially somebody inside that church who fired back and may have hit Kelly, and then he retreated, took off, and then died a short time later. We don't know from a police bullet, from the hit that he took inside that church, if he committed suicide, all of that yet to be determined, about 5 miles away. But still, we wait for the detailed information, if in fact they're going to give it to us at this briefing coming up. Go back to Steve Gomez, your time at the FBI. So if the ATF has cleared his home of potential explosives, and now the FBI is inside there, what is the FBI looking for at his house?
They're looking for anything that would indicate the motive. Now, we've talked about, computers. We talked about electronics. We talked about papers. We're talking about any kind of weaponry, explosives, materials that could be used to make explosives, any kind of material that would instruct how to make explosives. Also, we've talked about the high-capacity magazines. You usually can't buy those. You have to make those, and you have to adapt the magazines so they can take on higher capacity. So any kind of materials, whether it is printed out or online, it's also going to be the ATF. They're always looking for straw purchasers. And this is where we may get into the situation where there may be another suspect or two. Because if this individual purchased or was able to acquire the weapon or other weapons because he asked somebody else to purchase the weapon for him, then the question is, if that person did do that, did they know what he was going to do? So the straw purchase aspect of any kind of situation with an active shooter and a rifle or any kind of firearm is very important in an investigation, because that usually would draw in another suspect or two who supported the active shooter.
How often, when you go back to that home, are you going to find information that gives you any real answers? Yeah, I hate to keep going back to the Vegas shooting, but it's our most recent mass shooting and the deadliest in U.S. history. But they really didn't find a whole lot. There wasn't a lot of useful information in that house.
Yeah, there wasn't. But in the Vegas situation, there was at least one computer that had the hard drive removed, and there was at least some evidence that that Paddock had purchased one of those softwares that can wipe clean the computer, and I think that's still under analysis. So there were definitely efforts by Paddock to destroy evidence and to eliminate his footprint, so to speak. Now, in the investigation here with ATF and the FBI and local law enforcement, that they are able to determine that those types of efforts to destroy evidence before this attack occurred was done by the suspect, then that indicates that he didn't want people to know what he was doing and why he was doing it. Now, I can tell you another aspect of this is, and I hated to go down this road, but with the situation with Paddock in Las Vegas, you're always concerned about copycat attacks. Now, is that something that we have here? And if so, is that something where this suspect, depending on what they find in the search warrant of the residents, if they're not able to find any information, if they find that hard drives are taken and so on, then you have to start asking, why did he do that? I mean, did he learn from Paddock in the Las Vegas situation? These are just some of the issues that are going to potentially come up as they conduct the investigation.
And again, the new information that we have, Devin Kelly was his name from New Braunfels, Texas. We understand he is the gunman, according to sources. Multiple sources telling us that the preliminary identification is that he was a white man in his 20s from outside of San Antonio. Authorities are now scrubbing that social media that you heard Steve talk about there, Facebook and whatnot, and that now federal officials have been at his home, both the ATF and the FBI. They have been searching that house for explosives and now for evidence as well as they try to piece together why he carried this out. We have been waiting for quite some time now and still waiting for officials to give real solid information beyond what sources have been saying at the federal and state levels to give some information on what they know from the scene. ABC's Jim Ryan is live on the scene, and Jim has been talking to a number of people there who are looking for information as well. A lot of questions, both there locally and nationally, as to why this was carried out, Jim.
Absolutely, Alex. A lot of questions and not a lot of answers, but a lot of surprise on the part of people who live here. Baldassar Mata has lived in a house about a block and a half away from the church for about 15 years. And this morning at about 11 o'clock, tell me what was going on, Baldassar.
It was around 11:25, I think. My son and I were working outside, and then he decided to go inside for any reason. I think he was going to drink some water. And then we heard some shootings. I was like, man, I thought it was like people, at the ranch or something. But it was like keep on going and going. So my kid walked outside and he's like, that's shooting. I was like, can't be. I mean, this is, a quiet town. It can't be happening. So I walked outside. I walked to the street and I looked that way and I saw a white Expedition on the middle of the road. But I don't know if there was anybody there. And I went back inside because I got scared. And then I saw, people, police and ambulance start coming in, driving like crazy. And we walked over there, and then there was people already, outside the church, hurt and everything, bleeding and stuff like that.
Do you know any of the people in the church? No members?
No, actually, I know the lady that lives right on the corner. So I went over there to see if she was okay. But I think she's out of town or something. She wasn't there.
And the people you saw in the parking lot, what was their state of mind? What was their condition?
Oh, they were like critical condition. They were hurt. They were bleeding. As soon as the ambulances were showing up, they were putting in the ambulance and getting out of there.
How many did you see move like that?
Oh, it's like 6 or 7. But there was when I got there, they were already, taking them out. But there was a lot of people.
You touched on something, Baldassar, that Sutherland Springs, Texas. I mean, you hear about New York and Orlando, New York, and Las Vegas. Sutherland Springs?
Oh, that's crazy, man. A small little town, quiet little town. This, I don't know. On 15 years that I've been here, I have never heard nothing like that. The only people that make noise, I guess, is just the truck drivers whenever they go through here. But other than that, everything is, real quiet. Nice and quiet. Except for this.
Baldassar Mata, thanks so much. Appreciate your insights on this. He lives just down the street from the church. Alex has for 15 years, says it's been completely quiet until this morning at about 11 o'clock.
And he touched on the trucks going through. Is it on a major route of some kind, or would this have taken some work to get from New Braunfels into Sutherland Springs?
Well, no. I mean, certainly there are highways that lead. There's a fairly major highway about a block from here, and then the road splits off. There's a small residential street that then leads down toward the church. So access to this place, to this community, and to the church is not difficult. There is a fairly major, it looks like it's 2 lanes in each direction, winding off to the west from where I am here. But no, it wouldn't have been difficult at all to get here, either from New Braunfels or San Antonio.
Yeah, and looking at the maps here, for folks who don't know Texas, New Braunfels is about 48 minutes away, 45 minutes away from Sutherland Springs. It's not right around the corner. New Braunfels is northeast of San Antonio. Sutherland Springs is southeast of San Antonio. So it seems like there would have been something that had to have brought this guy to that area. Again, we know his ID is Devin Kelly from New Braunfels, unless he had some other connection to Sutherland Springs that he had been living there, and officials just don't know that yet. We understand he is a white male in his 20s from outside of San Antonio, from New Braunfels, and that on Facebook showed off an AR-15 style looking gun. A LinkedIn account indicates he may have had a military background. You can imagine that law enforcement is scrubbing that background right now. And go back to Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI, now ABC News analyst, and that military background, if he really did have one, how important is it going to be to figure out what he did in the military, what he may have seen during that time, if there's anything that was connected to him that they might be able to lead them in a certain direction?
Well, it's just as important as every aspect of his life that needs to be investigated in order to figure out why he would commit this type of an attack. But when it comes to military service, our servicemen and women, they're exposed to some pretty dangerous situations sometimes, and oftentimes it can impact them mentally, emotionally, physically. And so it's going to be very important to determine what he experienced during his time in the military, if he did serve in the military, and to figure out if any of those experiences that he had while there impacted his state of mind, which now led him to the situation where we're at right here. So it's going to be very important to determine what happened while he was in the military.
And online contacts, so often we hear about that they're trying to track down who this person may have been talking to in any shooting online, but seems like if he has a social media history, that may not be all that difficult.
No, it's not going to be difficult. It's a question of how active was he on social media. Some people have Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and so on, and they don't necessarily post a lot. They have connections and associates and so on, but they don't. They're not as active as some people. Some people are very active, and then that's very helpful with the investigation. So it's going to be a matter of determining what that activity was, who he was connected to. I would venture to say that anybody and everybody that he was connected to on each of those social media accounts is going to be contacted by law enforcement to determine what kind of interaction they had with the suspect, and that's going to be part of the investigation.
As an agent in your history with the agency, how tough is it to go to Facebook, to go to LinkedIn and say, hey, we want to know who this guy was talking to? Will they play ball very often?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, the service providers are going to play ball. They're going to help law enforcement. And a lot of times there's going to be an open subpoena that's going to be issued to each one of these service providers. It's then a question of tracking down those people that are listed on Facebook, Twitter, and so on, and making contact with them and getting them to play ball. I'm typically that's not going to be that difficult in a case like this. Most people are going to be horrified by the situation.
The latest information that we have right now: the suspected shooter, Devin Kelly from New Braunfels, Texas, dead. His body outside of a white SUV. You heard the witness who Jim Ryan was talking to a few moments ago, saying when he heard the shooting start, he looked outside and saw a white Expedition that was parked outside of the church in the middle of the street. Well, it is a white SUV, looks very much like an Expedition that ended up in a field somewhere that about 5 miles away from the church, with the gunman dead outside of it. There have been some reports from a congressman that gunman, Devin Kelly, may have been shot by somebody inside that church, been wounded, and then somehow died about 5 miles away. We don't know if he bled out, if he was shot by police, if he killed himself at that point. All information that we wait to hear from officials. But New Braunfels, where Devin Kelly was from, at least that's the name that's being given to us by federal and state officials, lived quite a ways away, if he really was from New Braunfels, from Sutherland Springs. We're talking a 45-minute drive. What brought him to Sutherland Springs is the big question right now. ABC's Jim Ryan is live on scene outside the church. And Jim, with the time change, no doubt it's starting to get dark there right now. Any difference from investigators on scene as they get ready for nightfall?
Well, yeah, in terms of getting relief out here, they're getting moving in some water and some food and some supplies that will keep this going. I'm sure they've moved lights down to the location as well. Here at this intersection on 13th Street in Sutherland Springs, I'm looking right at the Sutherland Springs Volunteer Fire Department, which is just down the street. So certainly there was help here very quickly on the scene. A little yellow house right next to it called the Community Building. And I don't know if that services their City Hall. But this is sort of the center of the action right here. People are still arriving, civilians and people walking up toward the police line, other officers. One man who lives just down the street, beyond the point where Baldassar Mata, the man I interviewed a few minutes ago, is walking past the police tape. He said he hadn't heard anything. He didn't even know why the street was blocked off. So as pervasive as social media is, and everybody around town is hearing about what happened, a few folks haven't heard word one yet, Alex.
Yeah, and still they're waiting for information, likely now that you've informed them that there has been a mass shooting. Surprisingly, it does happen at these scenes where somebody walks out of their home. Las Vegas was one that happened to me. A woman who lived right about a block away from the shooting scene walked out the next morning to say, hey, what's going on, that they had no idea. And they likely know now that they're looking outside and they see all of the crime scene tape, all of the FBI evidence response teams, all of the reporters who are looking for answers like so many people are nationally. We see an official, it looks like somebody from the Department of Public Safety in Texas in a cowboy hat, waiting and getting everything ready for this briefing that we've been hearing is going to be happening any moment for the last couple of hours. We expect to hear from the governor, Governor Abbott, who several hours ago put out a statement saying that he was heading to Sutherland Springs and called this a horrific act of evil, saying that he was looking for information. We know from the White House that he has spoken several times to the president, and that President Trump has been, who is in Japan right now for meetings, has been updated numerous times today from his staff as they have given him updates on what is known. Likely the president knows a lot more than what we know at this point because so little has come out from the investigative side, from those who have been on the ground officially. But we do know from sources that Devin Kelley is the suspected shooter, multiple sources saying that he is a white man in his 20s. Authorities are right now looking at his social media background on Facebook in recent days, showing off an AR-15 style looking gun, indicates he may have had a military background as well. And as Steve Gomez was saying a moment ago, no doubt that they are talking, investigators, the FBI and local sheriff's department, to the military, trying to figure out how long ago he was in, what role he played, any sort of incidents he had there. ABC's Aaron Katursky has been covering all of this and getting all of this information on the name and the background of this shooter. What else are you learning, Aaron?
Devin Kelley's home is now being searched by the FBI, Alex, and we're not sure if he's still living in New Braunfels or whether he is just from there, but wherever he lived most recently is now the subject of an FBI search as they try to find any clues that they can about what his motivation might have been. Separately, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms officials have been looking to see if there's any follow-on threat. We hear that he may have had a military background. We're still waiting for the Air Force to confirm and to give us the circumstances of his military service. And beyond that, we don't know very much about him. We're waiting for the authorities to even tell us how he died. According to a congressman who represents the area, this is Congressman Henry Cuellar, the gunman walked into the church with gun blazing and at some point came out perhaps to reload, was shot, and then fled and was dead about 5 miles away from the church shooting scene. But whether he was killed by law enforcement officials or someone else, or whether it was a self-inflicted wound, the authorities still have not been able to clarify.
And Aaron, I hate to use the cliche of it could have been much worse, but if he was reloading and if there were still people who were alive inside that church, if whoever took that shot, law enforcement or somebody inside who was armed, if they hadn't taken that shot and he could have reloaded, it could have been much worse.
Yeah, and as it was, 27 people have been injured, and we're waiting to find out the extent of these injuries as we hear from more eyewitnesses gathering where ABC's Jim Ryan is outside the church, you get the sense that they're coming to find out the worst. Inside the church are evidence technicians in white suits going through that crime scene that is well taped off with yellow tape from the sheriff's department there in Wilson County. And away from that scene is where we expect the authorities any moment now, Alex, to give us the latest. But it does appear that there were kids killed in this, including the 14-year-old daughter of the pastor. Some other kids killed as well, according to Congressman Cuellar. So, it's just awful.
Oh, yeah. And we've heard today from that pastor, First Baptist Church pastor Frank Pomeroy, telling ABC News that his 14-year-old daughter, Annabelle Renee Pomeroy, is among those who are dead. Pomeroy, the pastor Pomeroy, was in Oklahoma at the time of the shooting, and he says he's driving back right now. He said every one of their close friends is among the dead in this case. He says he wants the world to know his daughter was, quote, one very special, beautiful child. Saying that they are deeply affected by this as he makes his way back. We have received a picture from the family of their daughter standing next to a pool looking very happy and in happier times. The president has been briefed several times, has spoken to Texas Governor Abbott. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the White House press secretary, saying that the president's briefings have continued. He's been getting regular updates on this tragic shooting in Texas. They spoke with Governor Abbott earlier this morning because it's morning in Japan, where the president is right now. That they're going to keep everybody apprised of the latest information from the White House side, saying our thoughts and prayers with all of the friends and families affected. May God comfort them all in this time of tragedy. But no indication at this point that we're going to hear from the president anytime soon. He is in Japan. He's got a number of meetings. At some point when he has a break in those meetings, we might hear some comment, but the White House has not scheduled anything at this point. Back out to Jim Ryan, who's live now in Sutherland Springs, and Jim, the latest from there.
Yeah, and it's still just kind of sinking in with people. And you lived here some time, haven't you, sir? And if you can tell me what, you look around here now and it's completely different.
Well, I've been around here for close to 50s there, and got married, and then
you said you used to run the building that's right next to there, the little place over there next to the church, or?
Run the buildings?
Yeah.
Well, not for the church there. No, they just go and don't. I've never seen them, so many of them like this. I mean, I've seen them a lot of times. They've been just crowded up around that place, but there wouldn't be near that many kids or people there at the churches.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So, yeah, I mean, people are still trying to. The American Red Cross is here now. Just saw a relief truck pulling in here. And again, they're preparing for the long haul at this site, I think, Alex. I talked with some volunteers who work in an RV business about an hour from here. They heard what had happened out here. They shut down the business. They brought some RVs out here to transport families to wherever they needed to go. So really the community is kind of pulling together at this point to support the investigation, to support the families who were affected by this. It's sort of a tragic statement about where we are at this point. The community of Schertz, Schertz, a little tiny town not too far from here, tiny community. Their mass casualty evacuation ambulance is sitting out the place. It's well marked. It's the size of a bus. In a community with the size of Schertz now has a mass casualty incident vehicle, Alex.
It shows you the times that we live in right now, and a number of different agencies who are on scene, including the Red Cross, shows that just how long this is going to go on for, that law enforcement, everybody in that area, they're going to need relief. They're going to need blankets tonight. They're going to need food. They're going to need Gatorade as well, that this is all going to help them in the investigative process. We have been told, I don't know how much we trust this, but have been told that the briefing is about to begin right now. We don't know if it actually is going to start, but that officials are getting ready. Do I understand that it is about to begin now? Okay, let's listen in as it sounds like officials.
I want to thank the great citizens of Stockdale for opening up this community center, for pitching in and helping out, and continuing to demonstrate to the entire world the way that Texans come together to help their fellow Texans. As a state, we are dealing with the largest mass shooting in our state's history. There's so many families who've lost family members, fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters. The tragedy, of course, is worsened by the fact that it occurred in a church, a place of worship, where these people were innocently gunned down. We mourn their loss, but we support their family members. We appreciate the first responders and what they've done to help respond to this challenge. They are continuing in their efforts as they put all the pieces of a very complex puzzle together to try to provide their community all the answers they need and deserve. Unfortunately, I'm sad to tell you, to confirm, at least at this moment in time, there are 26 lives that have been lost. We don't know if that number will rise or not. All we know is that's too many. And this will be a long, suffering mourning for those in pain. We ask for God's comfort, for God's guidance, and for God's healing for all those who are suffering. As governor, I ask for every mom and dad at home tonight that you put your arm around your kid and give your kid a big hug and let them know how much you love them, knowing that we support each other. Tell your friend and your neighbor that you support them and that you will work with them. I'm very proud of the way that we have so many people working together to respond to this. Already, in talking to the emergency team in Texas, reported that the emergency medical task force from San Antonio was deployed to help respond to the magnitude of this tragedy. San Antonio area hospitals and trauma centers have coordinated with regard to patient movement and patient care. The Red Cross has set up Family Assistance Center to help all families affected by this. One thing that is very important for everybody affected by this, whether you're a family member or non-family member, is that you avail yourself of counseling resources that will be made readily available in abundance. Now, we have so many people who have helped respond in coordinated fashion already. I want to express my gratitude to the President who called from overseas, my gratitude to Senators Cornyn and Cruz, with whom I've already spoken, as well as members of the Texas legislature. But when you look at the robust response from just the immediate area, I want to express my gratitude to the Sheriff of Wilson County, to the District Attorney from this area, Audrey Lewis. The reason I say this area is because her territory is larger than just Wilson County. And to DPS Regional Director Freeman Martin. Each of those three will be speaking shortly. But also to the mayor of the area where we are located right now, the mayor of Stockdale, to the Department of Homeland Security, to the ATF, the FBI, the Bexar County Sheriff's Office, the Guadalupe County Sheriff's Office, the Wilson County Sheriff's Office, the Livonia Police Department, the Stockdale City Marshal's Office, and the Seguin Police Department. And I have no doubt that there are other law enforcement as well as emergency agencies that have responded to this. And I regret if I did not mention you. Just know that we appreciate the profound way that everybody's come together. I would like to now turn things over to Sheriff Joe Tackett from Wilson County, in whose jurisdiction the crime occurred and whose jurisdiction we're in right now.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you for your kind words. We all in here know what happened today, and it's something we all say does not happen in small communities. Well, we found out today it does. We need your support. You know, the media, don't blow it out there that, you know, it should have never happened, because it does happen. And we sincerely feel sorry for all of the people that are involved. We don't know names of any of the victims at this time, because we're still trying to work the crime scene. As we get the names, we're going to be contacting family members and letting them know what we have. But at this time, we don't have any names of any of the victims. Thank you.
Next is the District Attorney, Audrey Lewis.
Thank you all. We know that you have lots of questions that you want answers to, but understand this. Our number one priority and goal is to the victims and their families at this point, and we ask that you respect that as well. We want to make sure to notify victims' families before media gets a hold of that information. It is critical to those families that if we have bad news to bear, they need to hear it before it's announced on the media, and we're going to try to work to ensure that that occurs. We have lots of law enforcement who are all working very well together with federal and local and state agencies, and we highly commend the professionalism that's occurring. But because we have to make sure that that crime scene is handled appropriately, it takes time. And unfortunately, that leaves a lot of victims' families wanting answers that we don't really have for them at this very moment. We will be updating them as soon as we have information and providing that information so that they have the answers they need to deal with either the loss or go to their loved ones who may be in the hospital. We appreciate the work of all law enforcement, and we appreciate you guys. We know that you're trying to get out information. We don't feel there is a threat that's continuing, and I think that the media has done a pretty good job of making sure that that's been pronounced to the public. But we are working very diligently both to inform the families and to preserve that crime scene and make sure that it's handled appropriately. So thank you all for your time.
And next is DPS Regional Director Freeman Martin.
Everybody here wants facts, wants information about what's going on, and we'd love to provide you more. But if you came here wanting to know the motive behind this shooting, you're going to leave here disappointed. We have certain facts that we can release to protect the integrity of the investigation. We have to release it in a timely fashion and collect the facts and make sure our information is correct before we release it. We're here assisting the Sheriff, Joe Tackett. There's multiple agencies involved: DPS, Texas Rangers, FBI, HSI, ATF, Bexar County SO, and many, many others. We are all working together to support the Sheriff in this investigation. At approximately 11:20 this morning, a suspect was seen at a Valero gas station in Sutherland Springs, Texas. He was dressed in all black. That suspect crossed the street to the church, exited his vehicle, and began firing at the church. That suspect then moved to the right side of the church and continued to fire. That suspect entered the church and continued to fire. As he exited the church, a local resident grabbed his rifle and engaged that suspect. The suspect dropped his rifle, which was a Ruger AR assault type rifle, and fled from the church. Our local citizen pursued the suspect at that time. A short time later, as law enforcement responded, that suspect, right at the Wilson Guadalupe County line, he ran off the roadway and crashed out and was found deceased in his vehicle. At this time, we don't know if it was a self-inflicted gunshot wound or if he was shot by our local resident who engaged him in gunfire. We know he's deceased in the vehicle. The suspect has not been completely identified. We believe he's a young white male, maybe in his early 20s. He was dressed in all black tactical type gear and was wearing a ballistic vest. The delay in getting him identified is there were multiple weapons in the vehicle, and the vehicle has been processed by our Texas Ranger Special Operations Group bomb techs. There's a lot of work to be done in this investigation. We know that there are 23 found deceased inside the church, 2 deceased outside the church, and now one of them that was transported that was injured has deceased, bringing the total to 26. We have approximately 20 that are transported local and in hospitals in San Antonio with injuries that vary from minor to very severe. We know the ages range from 5 years old to 72 years of age. There's a lot of work to be done. We are only hours into this investigation, which is going to take a significant length of time. We will continue to provide information as it becomes available. We know you're going to have a lot of questions. There are many that we cannot answer. We continue to process crime scenes. We have multiple crime scenes. We have the church. We have outside the church. We have where the suspect vehicle was located. We have following up on the suspect and where he's from, his residence. We have many people to interview. We have Texas Rangers at all the hospitals locating those and interviewing those who were injured. So not a lot of information to give at this time, but the state of Texas, we have every resource that we have available. Texas Rangers, Special Operations, Texas Highway Patrol, Crime Scene Labs, Victim Services, the Texas Division of Emergency Management. Every resource we have available is working. And at the end of this investigation, we'll be able to answer any reasonable question as to what happened.
Was the neighbor injured? The one that engaged gunfire?
No, he was not. Is that
great? Well, thank you all, and thanks once again to law enforcement at all levels, from the local level to the state level to the federal level. The collaborative working relationship is one that will ensure a swift and certain evaluation of exactly what happened, and we will provide that explanation as quickly as possible. We will be leaving here and going to meet with some of the family members of those affected as soon as we finish up, but we'll take a few questions.
How many were in the church, and how many escaped death or being wounded?
Anybody knows that?
We don't have those numbers. There were people in the church that escaped that were not injured, but we don't have all the information.
Was
I'm sorry.
Was West being held at the time?
Yes.
Was the suspected shooter a part of any sort of known militia group? Is that being investigated?
Not at this time.
That is being investigated, but we haven't. We can't say one way or the other.
What about him was suspicious to begin with, or what initiated the original call?
Those are the types of things that are under intense investigation right now, and hopefully we will learn about them in the next 24 hours.
The revised total of victims, that does not include the shooter, correct?
Correct.
That's correct.
Can you tell us anything about a possible raid at the suspect's home?
All those types of things will be pieces of information that will be coming out shortly.
Were any victims outside the church?
Yes.
Did you know anything about any social media postings that he might have hinted that he would have done this?
All of those types of things are being looked into as we speak.
Please take one more question.
When are you going to release
the shooter's family was?
Say again.
Do you know if the shooter's family was in attendance at the church at the time, or had any connection?
Unaware of that.
When we release his name?
As soon as possible.
Was he known to the community, or was he an outsider?
We will confirm that when we learn it.
How can people help?
Governor.
As I think you're realizing, there's a lot of information. We want to piece the puzzle together before we provide you any misinformation, and we want to make sure that we meet with the family members who are affected by this before we release information publicly. We hope to get this information to you as soon as possible. Thank you all very much.
And the call that came in was an active shooter. There was no calls that came in of a suspicious person or anything before.
So how did y'all know he was at the Valero?
After the fact, we started investigating.
So you have the videotape from the service?
No, they haven't gotten it yet.
All right.
We'll send out information and updates through email.
Two dead outside the church, 23 in the church, and
I know that.
He didn't say? Okay.
Authorities did not formally name him, but that's who he is, and he was seen at a gas station across the street from the church, dressed in what authorities described as black tactical gear and a ballistic vest. He crossed the street with what was described as a Ruger AR assault-type rifle. I know that's not going to be a satisfying description, Alex, but that's what the authorities gave us. That's what he began using to open fire. As he exited the church, we're told a local resident engaged the gunman with his own rifle, and the suspect ended up back in his car, crashed at the Wilson-Guadalupe County line, and was found dead in his vehicle. The authorities say it's still not clear whether he killed himself or was shot dead by the local resident who had engaged him in gunfire. There were multiple weapons found in the vehicle, and 23 people found dead in the church. Another 2 were found dead outside the church on church grounds, with 1 recently pronounced dead at the hospital.
A total number of 26 killed, plus the gunman dead as well. 20 injured. The victims ranging from 5 years old to 72 years old. A variety of ages there. Want to go back to formerly of the FBI, now an ABC News analyst, Steve Gomez. Steve, of the information you just heard, what was most important, most relevant? Part of it, I would guess, would be that he was wearing tactical gear.
Yes, he was wearing all black. I think I caught that he was wearing a protective vest. That usually indicates a lot of planning because he's preparing for a firefight. They also announced that there were multiple weapons in his vehicle. That's an indication that maybe he was going to try to escape from the church and then maybe go to another location and using the additional weapons and commit another attack. So I think the law enforcement officers were very measured in what they were announcing in the press conference, which I think was a good idea because it's still very early, and just based on those facts, their protective vests, multiple weapons, you have to think along the lines of a potential intent to commit a secondary, if not third, attack after the church.
They did not talk about motive. They said they don't know motive, but there was no talk of terrorism. Which direction do you go down at this point in this case?
Well, it's an active shooter scenario. Still no motive being announced, but you have an individual who's fairly young, 26, served in the military, at some point. I mean, at least that's the indication we're getting, but was planning this out. So as far as any kind of ideology, they didn't announce any of this. Could this be a domestic terrorism type of situation? Yes, it's possible. They're probably at least considering that. It may not be that. That may not be the case. He may just be somebody who's got some mental health issues and decided to take it out on the people of the church and maybe of the community if he was going to do a second or third attack. But so it's still very unclear yet. But you have to at least consider the potential for a domestic terrorism type of situation unless proven otherwise.
And we now know it was a citizen who pulled out his or her own rifle and began taking on this suspect. And it sounds like maybe fatally wounding this guy to where he was found dead inside his vehicle.
If not fatally wounding him, it scared him off. It caused him to jump in his vehicle and drive off. And ultimately he died, whether it was self-inflicted in addition to being shot by the local resident. The local resident is a definite hero in this situation because it sounded like the suspect was preparing to reload and maybe go back in there and continue with the shooting. And also, given the fact that there were additional weapons in the vehicle, there may have been another situation, another attack that was going to be committed. So definitely high praise for that individual, that local resident who had a lot of courage and a lot of knowledge with using his weapon to stop the situation.
And that this was apparently a resident who was not inside the church but saw what was going on, came outside, got his rifle, his or her rifle, and then took him on. Steve, thank you very much. Again, what we just learned from officials, the suspect was seen at a Valero gas station, crossed the street, got out of the car, began firing at a church as he exited the church. Local residents, the one resident engaged the suspect, an AR-style rifle. Local citizen, that person pursued the suspect at that time. The suspect ran off the roadway, crashed, found dead in the car. Unknown how he died, if he committed suicide or if it was the gunfire that came from that resident. He was in his early 20s, in tactical gear, wearing a ballistic vest. ABC News has identified him, at least sources telling ABC News, as Devin Kelly, from about 45 minutes away from the shooting scene. For Aaron Katersky, Steve Gomez, Brad Garrett, I'm Alex Stone. You've been listening to live coverage from ABC News.
This is an ABC News special, Texas church shooting. From ABC News headquarters, here is correspondent Aaron Katersky.
Tonight, a massacre inside a rural American church. More than 24 worshipers were killed. The oldest, 72. The youngest was 5. Another 20 people were wounded when a gunman walked in during the late morning service this Sunday at First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, 35 miles away from San Antonio, and opened fire. The pastor's own 14-year-old daughter is among the dead, and she is the only confirmed victim. But a neighboring pastor said the tiny community is prepared to hear all of the names and know every single one. The gunman has been identified as a 26-year-old from nearby New Braunfels, Texas, Devin Kelly. The sheriff said he entered the church and fired a rifle before leaving the scene in a vehicle. He was found dead in that vehicle a few miles away after carrying out one of the deadliest mass shootings in modern American history. We begin at the scene of the church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, with ABC's Jim Ryan. Jim, good evening.
Good evening, Aaron. It was 11 o'clock this morning on this quiet street in a quiet town just to the southeast of San Antonio. People were going about their business, many of them going to church, others just coming out of church. Some people at a gas station just down the street of a Valero gas station where somebody started hearing gunshots. Baldassar Mata lives just a block or so away from the church, and he tells me what was happening then.
It was around 11:25, I think. My son and I were working outside, and then he decided to go inside for any reason. I think he was going to drink some water. And then we heard some shootings. I was like, man, I thought it was like people, at the ranch or something. But it was like keep on going and going. So my kid walked outside and he's like, that's shooting. I was like, can't be. I mean, this is, a quiet town. It can't be happening. So I walked outside, I walked to the street and I looked that way and I saw a white Expedition on the middle of the road. But I don't know if there was anybody there. And I went back inside because I got scared. And then I saw, people, police and ambulance start coming in, driving like crazy. And we walked over there and then there was people already, outside the church, hurt and everything, bleeding and stuff like that.
Do you know any of the people in the church? No members?
No, actually, I know the lady that lives right on the corner. So I went over there to see if she was okay. But I think she's out of town or something. She wasn't there.
And the people you saw in the parking lot, what was their state of mind? What was their condition?
Oh, they were like critical condition. They were hurt. They were bleeding. As soon as the ambulances were showing up, they were putting in the ambulance and getting out of there.
How many did you see move like that?
Oh, it's like 6 or 7. But there was when I got there, they were already, taking them out. But there was a lot of people.
You touched on something, Baldassar, that Sutherland Springs, Texas. I mean, you hear about New York and Orlando, New York, and Las Vegas. Sutherland Springs?
Oh, that's crazy, man. A small little town, quiet little town. This, I don't know. On 15 years that I've been here, I have never heard nothing like that.
And now the sun has gone down, still some light in the sky. Red and blue lights are flashing here on the street that is normally so quiet on any other day. Suddenly tragedy has struck here. A few minutes ago, a woman named Melanie Durbin, she attends church not too far from here. She heard what happened out here at this community. She decided she had to bring some flowers to the scene.
Well, I wanted to come down and bring some flowers and show my support to the people. I lost a little boy at the age of 11, so I know what grief feels like when you lose a child. So I just wanted to come and support the people.
Suddenly tonight, Aaron, a lot of people know that grief. The families of 26 people whose lives were lost here, the others now who are hospitalized undoubtedly in very serious condition. This entire community is coming to grips with what happened here just about 7 hours ago, Aaron.
Jim Ryan with us from outside the church in Sutherland Springs. Jim, thanks. We will hear from Jim much more throughout the hour. I want to turn to Congressman Henry Cuellar, who's with us now from Washington. Congressman, we know you represent that area, and we heard it reflected in Jim Ryan's question to one of the eyewitnesses. Sutherland Springs? How does it happen there?
It's a small community of less than 400 individuals where everybody knows each other. It's a very small community where You're right. I mean, this is not a place that evil would strike. This person, from what we understand, the gunman, is from Comal County. And if you look at the map of the state of Texas, you have San Antonio. The Comal is north of San Antonio, and then Wilson County is southeast of San Antonio. So to go from Comal all the way to a small rural community of less than 400 people, I don't think it was chance. This person must have known somebody, must have been related to somebody.
There had to be a connection, Congressman, right? There had to have been a connection. There had to have been a connection.
Yeah, you're right. It has to be some sort of nexus or connection. It just doesn't happen in a small little community like that. I've been there. My office goes there every single month to provide services. In fact, they'll be there first thing in the morning. I intend to be there at the end of the week to provide support. I want to bring some of my fellow congressmen to come with me so we can provide support to the community. But my office, they're there very frequently. We'll be there in the community talking to the schools because we have young kids that got killed, people that work for the county, pregnant women. I mean, it's just very horrible. Everybody knows. They're going to know once all the names are released, they're going to know of every individual that got killed or got injured. The community knows every single person.
There's going to be a lot of pain in that community for a very long time.
It's going to be hard, because, again, usually, you see this happen in certain areas. Who would have thought that this would have happened in Wilson County? Who would have thought this would have happened in Sutherland County? It's a very small, tight, close community where people trust each other, believe in each other. So it's going to take a lot to help rebuild not only the individuals, but the community, put that spirit back again. People are strong there. They're very independent. They're going to bounce back. But right now, there's a lot of hurt in that community,
Congressman, we thank you for your time. Congressman Henry Cuellar represents the area of Sutherland Springs and the surrounding area with us tonight as that community deals with the worst mass shooting in Texas history and one of the deadliest in American history. 23 people, worshipers, shot dead inside the church. Another 2 were found dead outside, and 1 was pronounced dead at the hospital. The shooter, a Devin Kelley, 26 years old, from nearby New Braunfels, Texas. I want to turn to ABC News consultant Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI. Steve, we're also getting word now there may have been a hero in all of this, a local resident who engaged the suspect in gunfire.
Yes, it sounds like there was a resident who was very alert, who recognized that there was something going on at that church, took very immediate action, and with action that probably led to the saving of many lives there at the church. And if this suspect intended to go to another location and commit another attack, saved many lives at whatever that location would have been. So just a brave citizen, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about this individual.
Undoubtedly, they still don't know how the gunman Devin Kelley died, whether it was a fatal gunshot from that resident, Steve, or whether he took his own life after he fled the church in a vehicle. But we can expect tonight the FBI is going to be searching his home. What are they going to be looking for?
Well, they're going to be looking for evidence that would establish what his intent was in committing this attack at the church, but they're also going to be looking at whether he was planning a second or third attack. And the reason why this is so important is because from what we've heard, there were numerous other weapons that were inside his vehicle. So given the fact that he went into the church and then he had weapons in the other vehicle or in his vehicle, you have to assume that he was then going to get back in the vehicle and maybe go to another location. So you're going to want to see if there's any evidence of what that other location was. And then in addition to if he was going to commit another attack, were there people or any help that he received from anywhere to acquire all those weapons and commit a secondary or third attack and this attack here at the church?
ABC News consultant Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI, which is now searching the home of Devin Kelley in nearby New Braunfels, Texas, after the worst mass shooting in Texas history. It unfolded at a church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. We'll return to the scene when this ABC News special, Texas Church Shooting, continues.
This is an ABC News special, Texas Church Shooting. From ABC News headquarters, here is correspondent Aaron Katersky.
A man opened fire inside of a church in a small South Texas community, killing 26 worshipers and wounding 20 more. The The gunman himself was found dead about 5 miles from the scene, and the governor of Texas called it the deadliest mass shooting in the state's history. The victims have not formally been identified, but we're told they range in age from 5 to 72. President Trump was briefed on the shooting while he travels in Asia, and moments ago made these brief remarks in Tokyo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for that wonderful introduction, I guess, right?
In Tokyo, beginning at the ambassador's residence with remarks on the shooting that took place just several hours ago in Sutherland Springs, Texas. He called it horrific, an act of evil, and said all of America is praying to help the wounded and families of the victims. Our White House correspondent, ABC's Karen Travers, is with the president in Tokyo and with us live. Karen, good evening.
Aaron, good evening. The president calling this mass shooting an act of evil, which he said occurred as those victims were in their place of sacred worship. The president said we can't put into words the pain and grief everyone is feeling, but he said his administration will provide full support to the great state of Texas as they investigate this crime. The president said he spoke to Texas Governor Greg Abbott just a few moments before he came out to speak. We were told earlier today by the White House that the president was briefed several times and was getting continuous updates on what was happening in Texas.
Karen, this president has been called on a number of occasions to address these kinds of incidents, most recently a terror attack in New York, before this shooting in Texas, and the massacre in Las Vegas.
And after adjusting his itinerary.
ABC's Karen Travers, our White House correspondent, traveling with the president in Tokyo. Karen, our thanks to you. It's good to hear your voice from there as the president calls this horrific an act of evil. I want to turn to ABC News consultant John Cohen now, formerly of the Department of Homeland Security. John, 3 of the 4 large locations where these things happen.
No, that's exactly right. Oak Creek, Wisconsin, mass casualty attacker walked into a Sikh temple. In Overland Park, Kansas, an individual with a gun fired at people at a JCC. Antioch, Tennessee, just several weeks back, an individual walked into a church and fired on people who were praying there. We're seeing these attacks occur in, as I mentioned earlier, large cities, small towns. And it's not the location that's important. It's the characteristics of the shooter that is important. And until we incorporate what we've learned about these shooters into the way that we try to prevent these types of attacks, we're not going to make any progress in stopping these types of incidents.
John, so far we only know very little about the shooter. He's been identified to us, according to multiple law enforcement officials, as Devin Kelly, 26 years old, from New Braunfels. He was wearing black tactical gear and a ballistic vest when he approached with a high-powered assault-style rifle, as the Texas Department of Public Safety described it. Does that tell you anything? There were multiple weapons found in his car. He fled the scene initially in a vehicle. What does that tell you?
Well, we'll learn more about this attacker in the days. Casualty attacks. So, while the motive behind these attacks may vary, in some cases these are people who are motivated by the ideology of groups like ISIS. In other cases, these are people who are angry about the political environment in our country. In some cases, these are people who become angry at people who they work with or they engage with at their school or in their community. But in all cases, these people have underlying mental health and other behavioral health issues. And it's those factors that ultimately are the underlying cause for these types of attacks.
John Cohen, formerly of the Department of Homeland Security and now a consultant with us here at ABC News. There is much more to learn about the gunman in Sutherland Springs, Texas, Devin Kelly, 26 years old, who targeted a place where people felt safe, First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs. We're going to return to the scene of the attack with ABC's Jim Ryan coming up, and we also have more from the president and others. I'm Aaron Katersky. You're listening to a special presentation.
This is an ABC News special, Texas church shooting. From ABC News headquarters, here is correspondent Aaron Katersky.
The deadliest mass shooting in Texas targeted First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, a rural community southeast of San Antonio. The gunman, a 26-year-old from nearby, dressed in black, wore a ballistic vest and carried what authorities described as a Ruger AR assault-type rifle. He approached from the gas station across the street and entered firing. As he exited the church, authorities said a local resident started shooting at the gunman, who fled in a vehicle and was found dead inside that vehicle a few miles away. There were multiple weapons in the car, but the feeling is there is no longer a continuing threat. Let's get straight to the scene with ABC's Jim Ryan. Jim.
Throughout this afternoon and into this evening now, the sun has set. People are still coming here to this location. People from around the community, around this neighborhood, and from far away. They've come here to offer their support. Pastor Lee Rios is with a Baptist church in Lavernia, which is not too far away from here. He's very familiar with this congregation. He knows the leadership, the pastor. He knows many of the members of this church, and he came here to help.
Well, we're seeing people from all over the state, San Marcos, New Braunfels, Corpus. We're seeing pastors come in from all over, just rallying around the families. This community is very well tight knit, but the beautiful part about this is the fact that people are coming together. In the midst of all of this, in the midst of this tragedy, there's such goodness. But we just got to be wise and use love as our language right now for these families, for those affected by it, and just continue just to pray. And all I can ask from your listeners is that they continue to pray and pour out their prayers, because, there's so many volunteers, but we just continue to covet the prayers and need the prayers because so many are involved. This is a small community connected to Lavernia, connected to San Antonio as a big brother, but people are needing a hug and a smile. And I think that's the way we're going to change this world, is by smiling and making somebody laugh.
Pastor Lee Rios with Lavernia Baptist Church, not too far from here. People across this community are coming together. Bright lights now have been set up there at the scene of the shooting as police and federal investigators come in, continue the investigation. They, like everybody who lives in Sutherland Springs, wants an answer as to why this happened here, what motivated this person to do what he did, Aaron.
No quick answer coming, though. It's ABC's Jim Ryan with us live from the scene in Sutherland Springs, Texas, site of the worst mass shooting in the state's history and the fourth deadliest in American history, and how dreadful that we are counting them that way. I want to turn to ABC News consultant Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI. What's the immediate work on the part of law enforcement on scene tonight?
Well, there's still a lot that we don't know, even though we just received that press conference there. And the law enforcement, it sounds like they're still in that same position. They've got a number of red flags that are coming out with regards to this suspect. First of all, he was well planned with this attack. He had not only the Ruger rifle that has been described, but also a number of weapons that were in the vehicle. He was also dressed in all black. He was wearing a protective vest. So it sounds like he was out for war, out for blood, and he got a bit of that at the church, unfortunately. But the question is, was he preparing to go someplace else and commit another attack or two? Also, what led to this? Why did he do this? And that's a big question, and they announced that they weren't going to be able to give any explanation on the motive yet. But how about individuals that may have assisted him in either planning the attack, acquiring all the equipment that he used in the attack, and especially the weapons? And was anybody involved in, say, a straw purchase of those weapons? That's going to be a big question there. So those are the main issues, amongst many other things, that they're going to be digging into.
We're speaking with Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI and now an ABC News consultant, as we continue to await further details from the authorities in Texas about the state's worst mass shooting. 26 people killed, 23 of them were found dead inside the church. 2 were found dead outside the church, and another one was pronounced dead at the hospital. Steve, we know the FBI and other authorities have started digging into the gunman's social media profile. So far, they found an image of him holding an assault-style rifle. They also think they've found evidence of a military background. Any of that of import at the moment?
Oh, major importance. from the military side, they're definitely going to want to understand what the suspect did in the military. What kind of training did he receive? Was he proficient in weapons, firearms, and what types? They're also going to want to know, was he honorably or dishonorably discharged? Did he have any issues while he was in the military? Did he serve in combat? And as a result, was he exposed to anything that might have impacted his mental, emotional, physical health? And so they're going to really be digging into that kind of background. And then as far as the social media and any electronics that he had, phone, computers, and so on, any research that he conducted leading up to this attack when it came to how he was going to perform the attack, the church, the congregation, the weapons that he was using, all of those could be very revealing for the investigation.
We spoke earlier this hour to Congressman Henry Cuellar, who represents the area, and he said, even though he wasn't sure from authorities, there had to be a connection to the church. Steve, why else would somebody from about 45 minutes away target that particular church?
And it could be the church, it could be the leadership of the church, the pastor or pastors. It could be various people that are part of the congregation that attend service at that church. It could be a number of issues that were going on in this individual's mind. Maybe not necessarily the church or the pastors, but maybe just an individual. Maybe there was somebody that he had friction with, and it may not have been the kind of friction that is, face-to-face or in person, but maybe it's something online. Maybe it was something through social media. Maybe it was over the internet, on emails and so on. That's something that the investigation is going to have to really dig into to determine what was that connection. But as that person said, it's very probable that there was some type of connection.
Let me bring ABC News consultant John Cohen, formerly of the Department of Homeland Security, into our conversation. John, what about social media? If it's really him holding up this assault-style rifle, they're going to want to know whether that was some kind of an indicator, right?
No, that's exactly right. And one of the things that we're seeing with these attackers is that they tend to be users, major users of social media, both consumers and producers. And what I mean by that is they tend to look at materials that are posted or that they access through social media and other internet-based communication platforms. They study past attacks. They become inspired by what they see on social media or on the internet, and that leads to their, or at least it serves as a way to encourage them to commit these attacks. But very often what we also see is that they tend to post things about the attack they're about to commit. And often they post things that will forewarn that an attack is coming.
More on that coming when this ABC News special continues.
My name is Jim. I'm a veteran, and I lost both legs in Vietnam. My victory
developing world, more than 400 children are born every
This is an ABC News special, Texas church shooting. From ABC News headquarters, here is correspondent Aaron Katersky.
The pastor of First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs was not there for this Sunday's worship, but his 14-year-old daughter was, and was among the 26 killed when a gunman opened fire. The pastor, Frank Pomeroy, said that he was in Oklahoma. He related to us that his daughter, Annabelle, was at the church for the service and told us how she had died and said she was just a terrific, terrific girl. He posts his sermons on YouTube, and we were watching last week's, and he opened by urging members of his congregation to welcome one another into the house of God. And it was a house of God that was targeted in the state's worst mass shooting. Again, 26 people killed. ABC's Jim Ryan is there at the scene. Jim?
Still a sense of disbelief, I think, on the part of people who are showing up here now. Their faces glowing from the headlights as they walk toward the police line that blocks off the area where this church is. I can see the glare of heavy searchlights down below where the search is continuing for answers, evidence about what was going on. A witness telling me that as he stepped outside after hearing the gunshots, that he saw a white SUV parked in front of the church in the middle of the street. He continued to hear gunshots, went into his house, later then went down to the church and saw wounded people standing there and many wounded on the ground. That's when the ambulances started showing up. So I think still this community is still trying to come to grips with what has happened here within just the last few hours. Trying to do what they can to help. I've seen people coming with casserole dishes, presumably for family members and for first responders and for those investigators. Undoubtedly will be here all night. There's a utility truck that pulled up a short time ago. RVs that have come from communities an hour or so away to help transport people, family members who need to go someplace, businesses that have closed down in order to provide food and water and support to this community, this tiny community. 400 people or so now dealing with something that just last week happened in New York, an attack of unimaginable proportions.
ABC's Jim Ryan with us from Sutherland Springs, Texas. And on that point, let's bring John Cohen, an ABC News consultant, back into our conversation because, John, Jim mentioned the attack here in New York where I am. That targeted not a high-profile event, and there are so many of them in this city, but a bike lane and a jogging path. This one targeted a church. Las Vegas was a concert. We're seeing more of these so-called soft targets come under attack.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, increasingly what we're seeing are these attackers are selecting targets that are what we call soft targets, places where the public congregates that are difficult to secure because by over-securitizing them, you prevent them from fulfilling the purpose that they were originally designed to fulfill. You know, transportation hubs, concert venues, sports venues, bike lanes, churches, houses of worship. These are soft targets. So, these are very difficult areas to secure. We need to think differently about them because these are increasingly becoming the targets that terrorists and other mass casualty attackers are selecting to attack.
And I want to turn to Steve Gomez, formerly of the FBI, another of our ABC News law enforcement consultants. Steve, we learned today from authorities in Texas there was a local resident who ended up engaging the shooter as he exited the church, and the shooting started with the gunman actually firing at the building as he walked across the street and then inside unchallenged, and then it was as he exited the church that a local resident started engaging him in gunfire. That's stunning.
It really is, and there's going to be a huge debate as a result of that circumstance that led to the private citizen engaging the shooter. In Texas, almost everybody is carrying a gun, or they have the ability to carry a gun, and this is clearly a hero. This local resident who engaged the shooter took swift action, realized what was happening, and basically prevented the shooter from going back into the church or going to another location and committing another attack. So, but the question is going to be, is that going to result in other people wanting to engage shooters such as this situation here? And are they trained for this? I mean, this private citizen clearly had the ability to take on the shooter, but that may not be the case in every situation. So there's going to be a big debate as to how private citizens who are armed are going to get involved in this type of situation. Are they trained for it? Do they know when they draw their weapon? And there are a number of issues that are going to have to be examined.
No question, because most gun owners may be trained in targets, but not necessarily in tactics, and it could be an awful mess. So as Steve notes, a political debate yet to come about the presence of this neighbor, a local resident who ended up engaging the gunman who left the church, fled in a car, and was found dead about 5 miles away in his car, either from one of the gunshots from the resident or from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. We'll return to the scene when this ABC News special continues.
This is an ABC News special, Texas church shooting. From ABC News headquarters, here is correspondent Aaron Katersky.
The shooting at First Baptist Church occurred during Sunday morning services. Children were present and are among those who were killed. 26 dead, another 20 wounded. Within the hour, we heard from President Trump, who called this horrific. ABC's Karen Travers, our White House correspondent, traveling with the president in Tokyo tonight. Karen.
Aaron, the president was delivering remarks to business leaders here in Tokyo. The focus was, of course, going to be on the economy. But at the top of that, the president said he had to weigh in on what was happening back home. He said he cannot put into words the pain and grief that everyone is feeling and that it's unimaginable right now for those who lost loved ones. But he said all of America is praying to help them, and his administration will provide its full support to officials in Texas as they investigate the shooting. Aaron, the president said he spoke to the Texas governor just moments before coming out here in Tokyo to make those remarks. The White House has said that he's been updated regularly throughout the day as soon as they heard.
ABC's Karen Travers traveling with the president throughout Asia. Karen, thanks. Let's return to the scene in Sutherland Springs, Texas now with ABC's Jim Ryan. Jim.
Remarkable thing has been happening here this afternoon and tonight. This community, the state, is really drawing together. Bill Pierce runs an RV lot about an hour away. He closed his business down, put the keys to an RV into the vehicle. He and an assistant then drove that RV here to help families who need rides to different locations around this community.
We just shut it down and filled up the new motor home and brought it on down.
Yeah. Why do that? You got a business to run.
Yeah, we have a business to run, but this is more important than anything. It's like America's being attacked.
I think a lot of people around Sutherland Springs are feeling that way tonight. They're taking it personally because this time, Aaron, it is personal.
ABC's Jim Ryan with us from outside First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Sunday morning services were going on when a 26-year-old gunman wearing all black and a ballistic vest approached from a gas station across the street, exited his vehicle, and began shooting outside the church before entering the building on the right side, firing all the way, the authorities said. And when he exited the church is exactly when a neighbor, somebody from the community, ended up firing at him. He took some gunshot wounds. We don't know whether that was one of the fatal wounds that killed Devin Kelly, this gunman, or whether it was self-inflicted, but he was found dead in his car about 5 miles away. This is the kind of thing that unfolds on a Sunday morning in a place where people were meant to feel safe. It was, as the president said tonight, an act of evil, and he asked that all Americans stand with those who lost loved ones. One of the neighboring pastors in Sutherland Springs said it is such a small community with just a gas station, a traffic light, and a couple of churches that once all the names are read aloud, everyone in town will know every single one of those names. The fourth worst mass shooting in American history. For my colleagues, I'm Aaron Katersky. You've been listening to a special presentation from ABC News.
When breaking news changes the world, ABC...